Somewhere there is a message you sent years ago, a photograph maybe, or a few lines you wrote to someone in handwriting you'd still know as yours. And if you came across it tonight and really read it, there's a fair chance you wouldn't recognize the person who wrote it. The opinions aren't quite your opinions anymore. The worries look small from here, or much too large. Some of the way that person loved or hoped has quietly gone out of you. The way a room you used to live in is still standing, but is no longer yours. And here is the strange part. That person is gone. There's no gentler word for it. The one who wrote that, who felt all of that, has in some real sense disappeared, and yet no one died, and no funeral was ever held. You're still here, in the dark, listening to this, continuous and unbroken. The same person who began this sentence, and is somehow still around to end it. Or so it feels. That gap between the someone who is clearly gone and the someone who is somehow still here is one of the oldest puzzles there is, and most people step over it every day without once looking down. Because the moment you do stop and look, it refuses to stay simple. Almost nothing about you has held still. The body reading these words has rebuilt itself many times over, down to a different face in the mirror than the one you wore at 10. The beliefs you defend tonight are not the ones you'd have died for then. Even your memories, the parts that feel like bedrock, have been quietly revised each time you've gone back to visit them. Change the pieces slowly enough, and no single change ever feels like an ending. But add them all up, across a whole life, and the arithmetic turns strange. At what point, exactly, does enough of you change that the word you begins to mean someone else? There are two honest answers, and they pull hard in opposite directions. One says, of course you're the same person. There's a single thread running through all of it. One continuous someone who was always there, even asleep, even forgetting. The other says, look closer. There may be no thread at all, only a long line of nearly identical strangers, each one handing the next a bundle of memories and a borrowed name. Both have been believed completely by people who spent their lives on little else, and the question has a quiet trick folded into it. It isn't really a problem waiting to be solved. It's more like a doorway, one you've been standing in your whole life without noticing. The way you never quite see the frame of the room you grew up in until the morning you carry the last box out. People have stood in this doorway for as long as there have been people to stand anywhere. It tends to arrive late, this question, after the day has burned off its noise, when you're no longer busy being someone, useful, scheduled, sure of your own name. It goes quiet in daylight. It gets louder right about here, at the soft edge of sleep, where the daytime self loosens its grip and the older question can finally be heard. Before any of that, one small thing. If a place that sits with questions like this one, slowly, in the dark, in no rush toward an answer, seems worth keeping alive, the subscribe button does more for it than almost anything else. And there's a single question worth leaving below tonight. When did you last catch yourself feeling like a genuinely different person than the one you used to be? The answers to that one are, honestly, the best part of all this. So settle in. Let your shoulders come down from wherever they've been hiding all day. They aren't needed up there for this. The question isn't going anywhere, and neither for tonight are you, though that last part is exactly what we're not yet sure of. It helps to begin somewhere very old and very plain, with a single object that stayed itself, supposedly, while every last part of it was carried off, one piece at a time, and replaced. The object was a ship, a real one, with a real berth in a real harbour, kept at anchor in Athens for centuries, because the city had decided it was worth keeping. In the old story, it was the ship that had carried Theseus home from Crete, back from the labyrinth, and the creature at the centre of it, with the rescued children still aboard. A founding vessel, the sort of thing a city wraps a piece of its own memory around and refuses to let go of. But wood at sea does not last. Salt water works into the timbers, planks soften and split, and a ship that is loved enough to be kept is a ship that is, board by board, always under repair. So the Athenians did what you would do with anything you meant to hold on to. As each plank rotted, they pulled it and fitted a sound one in its place. A timber here, a beam there, year after year, slow as a tide until, and no one could have told you the exact afternoon it happened, there came a day when not a single piece of the first ship remained. Every plank aboard had been cut from a tree that was still standing when Theseus died. Now stand on the dock and look at it. Same shape, same name, same place in the water it had always held. The guides still point and say, that is the ship of Theseus. And there, on the boards of an ordinary dock, with the gulls, the rope, the smell of tar, you are standing inside one of the oldest questions human beings have ever managed to ask. Is it the same ship? Two voices answer, and both of them are right, which is the whole of the trouble. The first voice says, obviously. Of course it is. It never sank, never vanished, never stopped being the ship, even for a single day. It was kept in good repair, the way anything beloved is, and repair is the most ordinary thing in the world. You do not get a different car because you change the tires. A cathedral whose every stone has been restored across 600 years is still that cathedral. The house your family has patched and repainted for generations is still the house, the same one in all the photographs, even when nothing inside the walls is original to it. We keep things mended precisely so they can go on being themselves. The continuity was never in the wood. It was in the unbroken life of the thing. The second voice is quieter and worse. It says, look again. Not one original board is left aboard. What sits in the harbour is a perfect copy that happened to be assembled slowly, by hand, over many years, and on the same patch of water, and that inherited the name out of pure habit. The first ship of Theseus rotted away so gradually that nobody thought to hold a funeral for it. What you are admiring is a very respectful replica that has never once been honest about what it is. This second voice is old. Centuries before the puzzle ever found its ship, Heraclitus had already caught it hiding in a river. You cannot step into the same river twice, he is supposed to have said, though what he actually wrote was stranger and more exact. The river stays the same river, he noticed, precisely because the water is never the same water. Stand on the bank and the thing keeps its name, its borders, its course, while the very substance of it pours past your ankles and out to sea, gone, replaced, gone again. A river is the one thing that manages to exist only by constantly losing what it is made of. And one of his followers, pushing the thought to its edge, decided you cannot step into the same river even once, that by the time your foot breaks the surface, both you and the water have already moved on. The puzzle did not stay a curiosity. It comes down to us because the Athenians really did keep that ship, and because a Greek writer named Plutarch set the argument down on paper, noting that the philosophers of his day were already using the vessel to fight about exactly this. Some insisting it stayed the same, others that it plainly could not have. And then, some 2,000 years later, an Englishman named Thomas Hobbes picked the knife up and sharpened it. Suppose, Hobbes said, that someone had been following the repair crews all those years, and suppose that as each rotten plank came out, this person quietly carried it off instead of letting it burn, saved every original timber down to the last peg. Then, in a warehouse across the harbour, fitted them all back together in their old arrangement. Now there are two ships. One floats at the dock, every board of it new, wearing the name and a history. The other stands in the warehouse, every board of it original, the actual wood that actually crossed the actual sea. Point to the ship of Theseus. You cannot point to both because they are plainly two different ships sitting in two different places, but you cannot comfortably choose between them either. The one in the harbour has the continuous life. The one in the warehouse has the original body, and the thing you were so certain of a moment ago, that of course the ship survived, comes quietly apart in your hands, because now there are two fair claimants and the little word same cannot be stretched across them both. It helps to notice that the same has been doing two different jobs this whole time, and hoping you wouldn't catch it at it. There is being the same in the sense of being one single continuous thing, one ship traced through time, however much it changes along the way. And there is being the same in the sense of being exactly alike, matching part for part. One word, two meanings, and on most days the difference never comes up. The ship is where it finally comes up, because the harbour ship is continuous without being original, and the warehouse ship is original without being continuous, and each one has walked off with a different half of the word. And here is where the harbour stops being in Athens, because the ship is not really the strange thing in this story. You are. Over the years, without ever once asking your permission, your body has been quietly trading out a great deal of what it was built from. Blood remade on its own slow schedule, the surface of you worn away and replaced, the soft lining inside turned over and over until a fair portion of the material listening to these words tonight simply was not aboard 10 years ago. By the river's logic, by Hobbes's logic, you are the ship re-timbered around a name, and yet you have never, not for one instant, felt the join. You have never woken in the dark and wondered whether the plank fitted yesterday had quietly made you someone else. So both voices are still standing, and that is not a failure to find the answer. For tonight, that is the answer. The ship is the same. The ship is not the same. The river is the same river, and it is never the same water. And you are somehow precisely this, lying here in the dark in a body that has changed nearly everything about itself and kept, through all of it, the quiet certainty that it is you. The room around you is darker than that harbour, and quieter, and far more your own. A question like this one feels different here than it would at noon on a crowded dock, closer somehow, and more patient, in no hurry to be settled before morning. And there is a smaller, nearer version of it already waiting for you. Not in any harbour, but in the few hours just ahead, in the ordinary gap you are about to cross without a second thought, the one you cross every single night and have never once worried you might not come back from. You did it again this morning, the way you do every morning, without once treating it as the strange thing it is. Somewhere in the night, you stopped. Not rested, stopped. In the deepest stretch of sleep, the part with no dreams in it, there was nothing it was like to be you. No pictures, no passing of time, no quiet voice narrating the dark. The world went out, and you went out along with it, and for some run of hours, there was just a gap where a person used to be. Then light came, or an alarm, or nothing in particular, and you were back, picking up the thread of being yourself as though it had never once been let go. That ship from the harbour has a way of following you home, because it is the same question, except now it is wearing your face and lying in your bed, the one who fell asleep last night. Did that person survive the crossing? Or did the light simply go out on someone and come up, hours later, on a successor who woke into the warm bed and the familiar name and the whole stock of memories, and naturally made the assumption every one of us makes the instant we open our eyes, that we are the one who lay down? You have no evidence for it. None. You cannot remember the gap because there was no you there to do the remembering. All you have is the morning and a sense of continuity so seamless and so total that the question never even forms. The thread feels unbroken. But of course it would feel unbroken either way. A perfect replacement and a genuine survival would feel exactly the same from the inside on waking, which is the only side you ever get to stand on. Every night you stake everything on an answer you have never once been in a position to check. And every morning you win, or seem to, or someone does. Set that beside a second strange thing, gentler than the first. Somewhere there is a photograph of you at 6 or 7 years old. Find it and look at the child in it. The word that comes is immediate and certain. That's me. There is a continuous line running from that small body to this one, unbroken, traceable year by year, with no gap that anyone could point to. By the only honest accounting, that child grew up to be the person holding the picture. And yet, look a moment longer, almost nothing of that child is left in you. Not the fears, not the favorite things, not the certainties, not the particular way of laughing or of being wounded. If that 7-year-old could somehow sit across from you tonight, the two of you might struggle to find much to say. You know things that would frighten them. They wanted things you stopped wanting so long ago you can't recall the wanting. That's me, you said. And it is also in some way you cannot quite talk yourself out of, a stranger, someone with your eyes, carrying the first draft of your name. So look at what has quietly happened. The word same has split into two completely different questions, and they have been hiding inside each other this whole time. One question asks whether you still exist, whether there is one single continuous someone who started as that child and is lying here now, one unbroken life, however much it has changed along the way. Call it the question of whether you survived. It is the morning's question, the sleeper's question, the one the ship was really asking all along. The other question asks something else entirely. Not whether you survived, but whether you are still recognizably you, whether the person you have become still matches the one you were in the things that actually make a person who they are. Call it the question of whether you are still yourself. We almost never keep these apart because the same handful of words does for both, and the confusion runs through ordinary life like a crack you have stopped seeing. When someone says across a kitchen table after 30 years, "You're not the person I married," no one in the room believes a different individual is sitting in the chair. The body is continuous, the survival is not in question. What has changed is the character, and the sentence borrows the alarm of the first question to carry the weight of the second. When a person rebuilding a life says, "I'm not who I used to be," they are not denying that they are the one who ran up the old debts. They mean the character has turned over, the way the ship's timbers did, while the single continuous life ran straight on through. It works a little like the difference between asking whether a long-standing thing still exists and asking whether it is still itself. A country can persist for 1,000 years as one unbroken state, the same legal person signing treaties down the centuries, and in that same span become unrecognizable in everything that ever gave it its character. It survived. It is also a stranger to what it was. Both are true, and they are answers to two different questions that the one small word "same" keeps fusing into a single false one. And the more unsettling of the two, by far, is the quiet one. The character question, the one that aches a little when you look at the photograph, at least has an answer you can feel and weigh. You have changed a great deal, kept a little, and you can more or less say which is which. The survival question offers no such comfort. It sits underneath the other one, unanswerable from the inside, asked and re-asked every single night, in the dark, at very nearly the hour you are approaching now. Which means the question has quietly moved while you were looking straight at it. It began as something almost practical, same body, same memories, surely the same person. It has become something with no flaw under it at all. If you can lose nearly everything about yourself and still be the one who survived, and keep your whole continuous life and still drift past all recognition of who you were, then what, underneath all of it, is the thing that does the surviving? What is even left to be you once the body has been swapped out plank by plank and the character has wandered off past knowing? You are lying at the very edge of that gap right now. In a little while you will cross it again, and trust, without a shred of proof, that the one who opens these eyes in the morning is the one closing them tonight. People have wanted badly for there to be something solid down there, some single, unchanging thing that does the carrying, that goes on being the real you beneath the shifting body and the drifting character. It is the oldest answer there is, and the most comforting, and for a very long time it had a name and a whole account of where you go in the dark. The name is the soul, And the answer it offers feels so natural, so close to the grain of what being alive is actually like, that most people have believed some version of it for most of history without ever once being taught it. Beneath the body that keeps swapping out its parts, beneath the character that drifts and turns over across the years, there is, surely, a single, simple, unchanging something. The real you. The one who was looking out through a child's eyes in that photograph and is looking out through these eyes now. Not the cells, not the opinions, not even the memories, but the bare fact of being a particular someone, the same someone, all the way down. You can feel the pull of it most at the two ends of a life. Stand at a graveside, and the body lying there is unchanged in almost every measurable way from the day before. And yet everyone present knows with a certainty beyond argument that the person is gone, that whatever made it them has left, and what remains is only the house they lived in. Or lean over a newborn a few days old and there is the overwhelming sense that someone has arrived, someone who simply was not anywhere a year ago, not a fresh arrangement of matter, someone. At both ends, the intuition says the same thing. A person is not a body, but something the body briefly carries. Philosophy has given this feeling its most rigorous form. Descartes, sitting alone with his doubt, found that he could strip away almost anything, his body, the entire world, every belief he had ever held, and still something was left over, doing the doubting. A thing that thinks. And a thinking thing, he decided, was a different order of thing from a body altogether. Not built from parts, not divisible, not the kind of object you could cut in half. You can lose a hand and remain entirely yourself. Nobody is half a person. So the self must be simple, indivisible, one. More than a century later, Thomas Reid set the same conviction down in plain words. "I am not thought, I am not action, I am not feeling," he wrote. "I am something that thinks and acts and suffers. Not the passing contents of the mind, but the one who has them. Strip every changeable thing away, and that bare, indivisible owner is what the old word substance was always reaching for. The underlying thing a person is, beneath all the features that come and go. The soul, in plainer dress. It is the safest feeling answer in the whole question, which is exactly why it repays a careful look. Between those two men, in time, sat a third who did not share their confidence. John Locke, an English physician who, when he came to add a chapter on precisely this question to his great book in the 1690s, began not from the soul but from a quiet doubt about it. He did not deny that such a thing might exist. He simply asked, if it does, is it actually the thing you care about? Watch what happens when you take the soul at its word. By its own definition, it carries no memories, no personality, no trace of any particular life. Those are all changeable features, and the soul was meant to be the unchanging thing underneath them, which makes it precisely the kind of thing whose coming and going you could never once detect. Yours could have been quietly exchanged in the night for a different one, and this morning would have felt no different at all. The very soul reading along now behind your eyes might have belonged 300 years ago to a stranger at the far side of the world, and you would have no inkling of it, no memory of their life, no share in a single thing they did. You would not be them and they would not be you, and the shared soul would change nothing whatsoever. So whatever it is you mean when you fear for yourself, when you hope to wake as yourself tomorrow, it cannot be the soul you mean. The soul could slip away and you would never miss it. What you are guarding is something else. To make that unforgettable, Locke told a small story, and it is the kind that only really works if you climb down inside it. Suppose that tonight, while two people sleep, everything that makes up the inner life of a prince, every memory, every intention, the whole sense of being himself, lifts out and settles into the body of a cobbler across the city, just as the cobbler's own inner life vacates it. In the morning, the cobbler's body wakes. It looks into the glass at rough hands and a stranger's face, but everything it remembers is the palace. Everything it knows from the inside as the prince. Now, where is the prince? Everyone Locke put the question to answered the same way without hesitating. The prince is the one carrying the prince's memories and the prince's sense of himself, never mind that he stands in a cobbler's body in a cobbler's shop. He is the one accountable for what the prince did. He is the one who would be tried for the prince's debts, not the cobbler's. The person went wherever the consciousness went. And yet, Locke added, who would call him the same man? The man, the living body, the hands, the face, stayed exactly where it had always been. So the person and the man have quietly come apart and walked off in two different directions. Run it on yourself, which is where it stops being a parlor game. If your whole inner life, your memories, your sense of being you, woke tomorrow inside another body, while a stranger's inner life woke inside the one you have now, you already know which of them you would call you. You would go where the memories went. You would fear for that one. You would not glance at your old, occupied body across the room and feel reassured that you were somehow still over there, and notice what you never once consulted in reaching that verdict, not the body which you handed over without much grief, and not the soul, that silent, undetectable token, which could have stayed in either body or in neither, and made not the slightest difference to your answer. This is the quiet reversal, and it is worth sitting with rather than hurrying past. The soul was offered as the floor beneath everything, the one solid thing left standing when the body and the character had both gone soft. But when you actually reach for it, your hand closes on nothing you were trying to hold. The thing you care about, the thing you would follow into the dark and into a stranger's hands, was never the bare, unchanging substance underneath. It was the memories and the awareness, the continuous inner life, the very features the soul had been defined to sit beneath and outlast. There is a kind of loosening in that if you let it arrive. The thing you were so anxious to protect turns out not to be the thing you were really protecting, and the search changes shape. No longer what unchanging stuff a person is made of, but what this continuous inner life actually is, and how much of it has to hold before the thread still counts as yours. Before letting the soul go entirely, though, it is a fair thing to put to yourself here in the dark, where only you can answer it. A self you can never feel, never lose, never catch the faintest sign of, a self that could be traded out between two heartbeats and leave no mark on a single thing you love about being alive. Is that, honestly, what you ever meant by you? Or were you always pointing at something nearer than that, and warmer, and far more easily lost? You can carry that question down into sleep with you. It is the kind the mind keeps turning over on its own, in the dark, whether or not you choose to follow. And it has already half answered itself because something stepped forward the moment the soul stepped back. If what you are and what you would fight to keep is not the substance but the consciousness, the remembered, felt, unbroken life, then the man who pried the soul loose had his next move ready. He believed he knew exactly what that thread was woven from. He thought it was memory, and that you are, quite precisely, as far back as you can remember being yourself. He almost didn't write it down. The argument that would go on to unsettle the next 3 centuries of this question existed at first only because a friend kept pressing him, William Molyneux, writing to Locke across the Irish Sea, asking him to say something, anything, about what holds a single person together across a whole life. So Locke, having set the soul gently aside, reached instead for the one thing that had been quietly doing the work the entire time. Not the unchanging substance beneath a life, but the life itself, lived from the inside and reachable from the inside. Memory, consciousness, stretched backward through the years, and the moment you test it against your own life, it feels almost too obvious to argue with. Find an old notebook, the kind that got kept through a hard year, a diary, the back pages where the real things ended up. Read an entry from 10 years ago. At first, it might be only words on a page. And then, somewhere on the right page, Something gives way, and you are not reading anymore. You are back. The grey of that afternoon's light comes with you, and the exact weight of what you were carrying, the chair, the window, the reason you reached for the pen at all, the whole of it flooding in from the inside, not as a fact you happen to know about some stranger, but as a moment you can climb back into wearing your own eyes. That, Locke said, is the thread. That reaching back, that ability to step inside a moment and own it from within, is not the evidence that the one who lived it was you. It is the very thing that makes it so. This is the something nearer and warmer that the soul could never be, a self you can actually feel and lose pieces of and find again, and see how much it quietly tidies away. The child in the old photograph is you, not because some invisible token was handed down from her, but because the reach goes all the way back, memory to memory, link by link, a line you could in principle walk down to its end. The gap of sleep stops being a threat at all. You wake, you reach back across the dark to yesterday, and the reaching itself reties the thread. You are, on this telling, exactly as wide as you're remembering. As far back as consciousness can stretch, that far back you go, and not 1 inch beyond. This is the place where most retellings of Locke stop. You are your memories, they say, and move along, as though it were a tidy motto about not forgetting your childhood. But his real idea was stranger than that, and far more humane. Locke called person a forensic word, a courtroom word, a word about answering for things. To be a person, for him, was to be the kind of creature that can be praised and blamed, held to a promise, called to account. And you are answerable, he thought, precisely as far as your consciousness reaches, and no further. You are not on the hook for what a stranger did. You are not truly on the hook either for what was done in some blackout you cannot reach by a version of you that left no thread back to here. Identity, on this view, was never a lump of stuff that persists. It is a relationship. The relationship of being able to say and to mean it, that was me. I did that. That one is mine to answer for. You are exactly as large as what you can own. It is the same thread that lets you still take a quiet pride in something done half a lifetime ago, and the same thread along which an old wrong can still travel the years to reach you and sting, both of them yours, because you can still climb back inside them and find yourself there. It is a beautiful answer. It held the field for a long time, and in a gentler form, it holds a good part of it still. But before long, a quiet objection arrived, and it has never entirely gone away. It came from a bishop named Joseph Butler, who set his finger on something just faintly wrong with the whole machine. Go back, Butler said, to that moment surfacing out of the notebook, the afternoon you re-enter from the inside. When it returns to you, notice that it returns already stamped. It does not arrive as a loose, ownerless scene that you then choose to claim. It arrives as yours, your name on it, before you have lifted a finger. And there is the catch. To remember a thing from the inside is already to take for granted that the one it happened to was you. The memory cannot be building your identity up out of nothing, because the whole time it leans on an identity it has quietly assumed. Consciousness of who you are, he wrote, presupposes and therefore cannot constitute personal identity. It is, for now, only a hairline crack. The warmth in the notebook is real. The recognition is real. Tonight, the memory thread still feels like the truest answer anyone has managed to offer. But the crack does one useful thing. It turns the whole question a quarter turn on its axis. The search began as a hunt for the stuff a self is made of, not the soul, it turned out, but memory, the thread of owned experience. Butler's small doubt suggests the thread is not the floor of the thing at all, but something resting on a floor that was laid earlier and out of sight. So the real question may not be what a self is made of, nor even how far back a person can remember. It may be the one folded underneath both. What makes a remembered life someone's own in the first place, and how far that owning can stretch before it wears thin and quietly lets go. The room around you is full of quiet evidence for the warm answer. The things on the shelves that mean anything at all only because you remember why they are there. The particular dark of a room that has watched you fall asleep 1,000 times and found you here again every morning. In here, at this hour, the thread feels unbreakable, and it is the easiest thing in the world to believe that you are simply the sum of everything you can still reach. The crack stays exactly where it is, fine as a hair, and for tonight, it holds. You are 10 years old, and you have been caught stealing apples from a neighbour's orchard, and for it, you are flogged at school in front of everyone. A burning, humiliating afternoon you are certain you will never forget. Now you are a young man in your first battle, terrified and more alive than you have ever been, and you seize an enemy standard, their flag, out of the smoke and carry it back through the lines, and they decorate you for it. And in that proud, shaking moment, you can still feel the old sting of the orchard. You remember clearly the boy who was flogged. Now you are old, a general, grey, much honoured, near the end of it all. You remember the day you took the standard, the smoke, the weight of the pole, the fear turning into something like joy. But the orchard is gone, the flogging, the apples, the boy who stole them. No trace of any of it remains anywhere in you. Reach back as far as you can, and you cannot find him. This is the trap Thomas Reid built late in the 1700s to spring on the warm answer. And it was sprung, as it happens, by the same Scotsman who held that the self was something simple and indivisible, something memory could only ever point at and never make. Run the warm rule across the 3 lives. The officer remembers the orchard, so by that rule the officer and the boy are one and the same person. The general remembers the battle, so the general and the officer are one and the same. But the general cannot reach the orchard at all. So by that very same rule, the general and the boy are not the same person. And there the answer breaks clean in 2, because identity is what gets called transitive, a flat, logical requirement that if one thing is the same as a second, and the second the same as a third, then the first and the third have no choice left but to be the same as well. If the general is the boy's same person by way of the officer, then the general simply is the boy, like it or not. Yet the rule has just announced that he is not. The general both is and is not the boy who stole the apples. Reid set it down in exactly those terms. The general is, and at the same time is not, the same person who was flogged at school. If the bishop's earlier objection had been a whisper, a hairline you could keep believing your way around, this is the answer itself snapping in your hands. A flat contradiction, produced on one fair and ordinary example, and a contradiction is the single thing an answer is never allowed to be. Stop here though and ask whether the word doing all this damage is even being used honestly. When you say in the ordinary way that you remember your childhood, you mean something loose and generous, a patchy archive, half of it rebuilt from photographs and the stories relatives told, scenes you are no longer sure you witnessed or only heard described later. The warm rule needs something far stricter than that, a clean, first-person reach, an unbroken inner line running back to the original moment. Almost nobody's memory is actually like that. So perhaps the puzzle is partly a trick of the word, 2 quite different things, the everyday remembering and the philosopher's reaching, wearing the same handful of letters and being quietly swapped for one another. The suspicion does not lift the contradiction, but it does suggest the warm answer was resting its whole weight on a single word that was never built to carry it. The answer did not die there, though. Locke's defenders in the centuries that followed looked hard at Reid's broken general and decided the flaw was never in the idea of consciousness carrying the self, only in the demand that one memory stretch the entire way. So they changed the unit. Forget the single long reach. Think instead of a chain of overlapping links. The general is firmly joined to the officer, who is firmly joined to the boy, and a chain holds perfectly well even when no single link runs the whole length of it. Better still, think of a rope. Pull any rope apart and you find that not one fibre in it runs from end to end. The rope is strong and continuous and unmistakably one rope, precisely because its short fibres overlap, each handing on to the next. Your life on this repair is a rope of overlapping rememberings. The general need never recall the orchard at all. He is the boy regardless, carried the whole distance by links he could never personally trace from one end to the other. It works. It genuinely works. The contradiction quietly lifts and the warm answer walks away repaired. But look closely at what it had to become in order to survive. You are no longer a single rememberer, standing at the near end of your life and reaching cleanly back down its length. You are a rope, a long succession of overlapping selves, each holding the hand of the one just behind it, no single one of them present for the whole journey, the earliest of them reachable only by inheritance. The way a country is continuous with a founding that no living citizen ever attended. Take the plainest case there is. You cannot remember being 2 years old. Not 1 second of it. Not a face, not a room, not a single afternoon. By the strict rule, that child is simply not you. By the rope, that child is yours, joined to you down a chain of links, no part of which you can feel from the inside. You take it entirely on trust that the rope reaches all the way back to them. You have never once walked its length to check. So the answer survived, but only by handing back something you might not have expected to lose. You are the child in the orchard, and you cannot reach a single second of being them. Both of those are true at once now, and the rope does not cancel the strangeness of it. It only gives the strangeness a shape you can live inside. The general is the boy and is not the boy. You are continuous with a child you will never meet, tied to them by a thread you are obliged to take on faith, because no one, not you, not anyone, was ever awake for the whole length of the line. Notice your breathing for a moment. It has slowed without being asked to. Whatever else is true, the body lying here has made the entire journey the memory could not. It was in the orchard, and it is in this bed, unbroken. Even across the nights, the mind went dark and dropped the thread entirely. There is some comfort in that, and there is a fresh unease folded just beneath it. All of this, the warm thread, the broken general, the rope that saved them both, has quietly assumed that there is a you for the chain to belong to, someone the rememberings happen to, someone holding the rope at this end. Better, finally, to stop tracing the thread and turn to look straight at that someone. The people who have actually tried report something they did not expect. They go looking and they come back having found the thread and the rememberings and the whole long rope, but never, anywhere, the hand that was supposed to be holding it. So look for it, not in theory, not later. Now, while the looking is easy and the house is quiet, set the body aside. You already know that changes. Set aside the name, the memories, the whole long rope. Those have all turned out to be things you have, rather than the one who has them. What you are after is simpler and more basic than any of them. The one doing the looking. The one these words are arriving for. The someone behind your eyes who is, presumably, following along this very instant. Find that. Turn your attention around the way you would turn to catch a person standing behind you and look straight at the looker. Go ahead. The rest of this can wait a moment. Here is what happens, more or less, every time anyone tries. You turn inward and the first thing you meet is a thought. The thought, perhaps, that the search is now underway. So you turn toward the one having that thought, and what you catch is another thought, the noticing of the first. Reach behind the noticing for the one who notices, and there is only a further noticing, already in progress. It is like trying to watch your own eyes in the act of seeing, not in a mirror, but directly from the inside, or like spinning around fast enough to glimpse your own back. The thing you are chasing moves exactly when you move, because it is the moving. You find a worry, a patch of lamplight, the sound of your own breathing, the faint pressure of the bed against you. You find experiences, one after another, in an endless, soft procession. But the one they are supposedly happening to, the self that is meant to be seated behind them, having them, never once turns up among them. You only ever catch the next experience, never the experiencer. There is a particular feeling that comes with this if you stay past the first few tries. Not fear exactly, but a kind of weightlessness, a foregone lightness. You came looking for the most certain thing in your whole world, the one thing you would have sworn you could never doubt, your own presence to yourself, and your hand passed straight through where it should have been. This is exactly what David Hume found when he went looking in the 1730s, a man not yet 30 writing the boldest book of the century in a farmhouse in France. "When I enter most intimately into what I call myself," he wrote, "I always stumble on some particular perception or other of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. I never can catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception." And from that plain, repeatable failure, he drew the most vertiginous conclusion in the whole question. If you can never find a self apart from the passing experiences, the boldest reading is that there is no self apart from them. Perhaps what you call you is not a thing that has experiences at all, but simply the experiences themselves, a bundle or collection of different perceptions, as he put it, succeeding one another at an unimaginable speed and never once standing still. A bundle with no one underneath holding it. A play, he said, with no stage it is performed upon. And then he caught himself even there and added the warning, "Do not let the theatre fool you. There is no theatre, no place where any of this is happening, only the scenes and nothing at all behind them." And then something rare and quietly magnificent happens in the history of this question. Hume, having built the whole case for the empty bundle, sat down to write an appendix to his book and confessed that he could not make it work. He could not, by his own lights, explain the one thing the theory most needed to explain. What gathers the loose perceptions into a single mind in the first place? What makes this bundle one bundle and yours rather than no one's? "I find myself involved in such a labyrinth, I must confess," he wrote, "that I neither know how to correct my former opinions nor how to render them consistent." He did not take the empty room back. He simply admitted in print that he had reached the edge of what he could account for, that two of his own deepest commitments would not lie down together, and that he did not know how to make them. 3 centuries on, no one has fully untangled his labyrinth either. There is a strange honesty in it that is worth pausing on. The man who emptied the room was also the man who said, plainly, that he could not explain why the empty room still holds together as one. But the empty room is not the only way to read the failure. And the deepest answer to Hume came from someone who accepted the experiment entirely and drew the opposite lesson from it. Immanuel Kant granted every word. "You will never catch the self among your experiences," he agreed. "Never find it sitting there like one more object in the inner room. Of course you won't, because it was never going to be one of the objects. It is the looker, not anything looked at. The subject, never the scene. An eye can take in a whole landscape and never once see itself, not because the eye is absent, but because seeing is the one thing it cannot turn into a sight. Look at any experience you have," Kant noticed, "and each of them comes already belonging to someone. Each arrives able to carry the silent tag, 'This is mine. This is happening to me.' That belonging together, that gathering of every experience into a single having, is not one more item you might stumble on in the search. It is the shape the search itself takes. So the self does not appear when you look, for the same reason the floodlight never appears in the scene that it lights. The room is not empty. It is only that you are standing in the one place it can never quite be seen from, your own." Though Kant was careful too, almost as careful as Hume, that the experiences are gathered into one having, he thought, you can be sure of beyond doubt. But what does the gathering, whether there is some real thing there behind it, or only the bare requirement that it all hold together, is precisely what you can never come around far enough to see. The unity is certain, its owner stays in shadow. So the two of them leave you in a strange and almost weightless place. You cannot find the self. That much the doubter and his greatest critic agree on completely. What you cannot settle is what the not finding means. Whether you have peered into the place where a self should be and found it genuinely vacant, or whether you have simply met the one thing that can never be an object to you, because it is the you that all objects are objects for. And this may be a question that was never built to be answered at all, one that wants instead only to be held. It is possible that is there anyone in here, or only the experiences, is less like asking how far away the moon is, and more like a riddle meant to be carried than cracked. One whose whole worth lies in the sitting with it, in what the asking quietly does to you, rather than in any verdict you could write down and be done with. You do not have to decide tonight, you may not have to decide ever. Some questions are companions rather than problems, and this may be the deepest companion the whole long inquiry has to give, so carry it down with you. It is, as it happens, the perfect hour for this particular question, because in a little while you will do the one thing that settles it without answering it. You will fall asleep, and the procession of experiences will thin and slow and stop, and for a stretch of the night there will be no perceptions, and so, on the doubter's own account, no bundle and no you, only the dark. And then in the morning it will all start up again, somehow gathered back into one. The question can keep its mystery overnight. The mind goes on turning these things in the dark whether or not you follow it down. And yet, before you go, notice the one thing in all of this that never once went missing in the search. You set the body aside at the very start as the obvious thing, the thing that changes. But while the self refused to be caught and the soul stayed undetectable and the memory thread frayed in your hands, the body simply lay here, breathing, warm, indisputably and stubbornly present the whole time, asking to be found by no one because it had never once been lost. It is hard not to wonder whether the looking was aimed too high all along, whether the thing you are is not hiding somewhere up in the mind, forever a step ahead of the search, but lying right here, plain as the weight of you on the mattress and a great deal harder to argue away. It is in fact the most obvious thing in the room, and the whole long search has been quietly stepping around it. Look at where the looking has gone, up and inward, every single time, after a soul, after a thread of memory, after a self hiding somewhere behind the eyes, all of it aimed high, into the mind, as though that were plainly the place a person had to be kept. But suppose that was the mistake from the very start, that you are not, at bottom, a mind at all, not a self that happens to be carried around inside a body, but the other way entirely. A living animal that, among all the other things it does, happens also to think. Here is the case, and it is sturdier than it first sounds. Lie still and take stock of what is unquestionably present. There is, beyond any argument, a living creature here, a human animal, a warm biological organism born from two other animals running on breath and blood and electricity that will one day stop and go back into the ground. No one doubts that this animal exists. You can feel it, the whole stubborn weight of it. And this animal is, at this moment, thinking. It is taking in these words, turning them over, having these very thoughts. Now, you are the one having these thoughts. So either you simply are that animal, plainly and without remainder, or you are some second thinker sharing the bed with it, a self laid over the organism, the two of you somehow thinking the same thought in the same skull at the same instant. And that second picture, once you say it out loud, is hard to keep a straight face about. Far simpler and far stranger to admit the obvious. There is one thinker here, and it is the animal. You are not a ghost riding a body. You are the body. The view has a plain name: animalism, the claim that you are simply and exactly one particular living animal, and its great gift is how much it quietly clears away. Watch the puzzles fall. The gap of sleep that seemed such a threat. No threat at all. The animal never paused for a second. Its heart kept its time straight through the night, whether or not the lights of the mind were on, and you came through because it did. The endless turnover of your material, that is simply what being alive is. Not to be a fixed object, but to be an ongoing process, a living thing that holds itself together precisely by taking in the new and letting the old go. The same single organism from the first cell to the last breath. The general who could not reach the boy. One animal beginning to end. The memory was never what made them one. And the self you could not catch in the empty room. Of course you couldn't, because there was never a self there to be caught. There was only the one lying there looking, the animal which no more needs to find itself by introspection than it needs to locate its own digestion before it can digest. After a long night of dead ends, this lands like cool water. The thing you are has been here the whole time, undeniable, continuous, asking nothing of you but breath. But set that certainty down for a moment and lay the other picture beside it, the one you have lived by your whole life without once arguing for it. Back when a prince's entire inner world woke inside a cobbler's body, you did not hesitate. The person went where the memories went. You would have followed your inner life into the strangest body in the world and called that following you. By this picture, you are emphatically not the meat. You are the awareness, the remembered life, the someone, and the body is the boat it travels in, precious, but not, in the end, the passenger. Two complete and confident answers to the single question of what you most basically are: a living organism that happens to think, or a thinking someone that happens to be housed in an organism. For almost everything, the two can run side by side and never touch. There is one specific place where they cannot. Bring the two of them to that one place. It takes a surgery to get there, not magic this time, just an extreme version of something hospitals already do with hearts and kidneys. Surgeons lift out your cerebrum, the great folded upper brain that holds your memories, your personality, the whole running stream of your thought, and they set it, intact and working, into another body whose own upper brain has been removed. They keep your old body alive on the table, the brain stem still in it, still running the lungs, still keeping the heart at its work, a living organism, breathing, warm, but emptied now of everything you ever called your inner life. Across the room, the other body opens its eyes. It remembers your childhood. It knows your name as its own, carries your fears, finishes the sentence you had been thinking. By every test of memory and mind, your entire self is now looking out through a stranger's face. So where, in all of that, are you? Almost everyone answers the same way, instantly and from the gut. You are over there, behind the new eyes, wherever the memories and the awareness ended up. You went with your cerebrum. The thing left breathing on the table is a tragedy, but it is not you. It is a body you have vacated. And that answer feels as obvious as anything in this whole inquiry. But notice what it has just done to the comfortable view. Because animalism, the clean, cool water answer you fell for a few minutes ago, has to say the exact opposite and say it without blinking. You are the animal. The animal is the organism on the table, still alive, its life unbroken. The cerebrum is one of its organs. Lifting it out and carrying it across the room is, in principle, no different from moving a liver. An organ went to another body. You did not. On animalism, you are the warm, breathing, mindless thing on the table. And the person waking with your whole life behind their eyes is simply someone else, a different animal who has been handed your memories the way another person might be handed your books. This is not a trick, and it has no tidy way out. The philosophers who hold that you are the animal know exactly how strange their verdict sounds, and some of them accept it anyway. They say the gut reaction is a deep and very natural bias, our lifelong habit of identifying ourselves with our own minds, and that a habit, however strong, is not an argument. You would stay on the table, they say, because that is where the living animal stayed. The surgery moved an organ and a great deal of grief, but not a person. The other side answers that any view forcing you to call the breathing husk you while your entire conscious life walks out through the door has not solved the problem at all. It has only produced an answer so impossible to believe that the view itself must be wrong somewhere. And the honest report from the middle of it is that there is no settled winner. People who have spent their lives here come down on both sides and stay there. What makes it so stubborn is not that the question is murky, it is that it forces you to surrender one of two things you were sure of: that you are obviously the thinking creature in this bed, and that you would obviously go wherever your mind went, and both had felt beyond all question, right up until they were put in one room and made to fight. It is not really a question about surgery, of course. The same split runs quietly through ordinary speech. You promise to be somewhere in body, if not in spirit, and everyone knows precisely what you mean, as though the two could be left in different rooms, and it stops being abstract altogether at a certain kind of bedside, the one almost everyone reaches in the end, where someone loved lies with the body working and the mind largely gone, far into dementia or further. You sit there held in the exact pull this has been circling, unable to settle it even with your hand on their arm. The animal is alive, by one whole picture that is unarguably still them, present here, to be cared for and spoken to. By the other, the one you love has mostly already gone, and what remains is the beloved organism they used to look out from. Most people discover uneasily that they believe both at once, and that their grief cannot decide which of the two it is for. So the question comes back to you, where it has been pointing all along, and it is not really asking for an argument. Lying here tonight, inside this warm and breathing animal, your whole inner life running quietly within it, if the two of them ever had to come apart, which one would you go with? Would you follow the memories out into the stranger's body and leave the old organism behind? Or would you stay here in the breathing thing, even scoured of every thought and memory you have ever called yourself? You do not have to be able to defend the answer, but notice which way you lean here in the dark before the daylight reasons line themselves up, because that lean is about the most honest evidence you will ever get of what you take yourself underneath everything to be. And notice too that whichever way you went, some quiet part of you stayed unconvinced and is pulling, even now, toward the other. You will get a small rehearsal of it before long, as you do every night. In a little while the inner life will dim and loosen and let go. The thinker will fall quiet and the animal will stay, heart keeping its time, lungs at their slow work, the body holding its own watch through the hours without anyone exactly keeping it. Every night you become, for a few dark hours, precisely the figure on the table, a living organism with the lights of the mind switched off. Right at this hour, at the soft edge of it, you can almost feel the two beginning to part, the mind starting to loosen its grip on the animal it keeps insisting it must either be or own. And maybe that insistence is the whole of the trouble. Every answer so far, soul, memory, mind, organism, has taken for granted that you must at bottom be some one thing, a single item the word you can land on and stay put. Long before any of these arguments were ever written down, on the far side of the world, someone picked that assumption up between two fingers, held it to the light, and began, very calmly, to take it apart, one piece at a time. He began with a chariot. His name was Nagasena, Nagusainu, and the chariot he reached for, to make his point, was yours. Set yourself down for this in an unlikely place and a far stranger time, somewhere in the dry northwest of the Indian subcontinent, more than 2,000 years ago, in one of the Greek kingdoms that Alexander's armies had left scattered across Asia like seeds. You are the king there. Your name, in your own Greek, is Menander. The Indian texts that remember this evening call you Melinda, though the conversation itself comes down to us in a book composed most likely generations after any real Menander and any real monk had died, a remembered argument rather than a transcript of one. You are clever, restless, fond of a good fight in words, and you have summoned a Buddhist monk to your hall to find out whether his teaching can survive a sharp afternoon of questions. He arrives, you ask as a simple courtesy for his name, and he answers in a way that ruins the courtesy entirely. He is called Nagasena, he says, but the name points to no one. There is no permanent self, no person to be found anywhere inside Nagasena. It is a sound, a convenience, a label tied around a bundle. You do what any sensible person would do. You object. If there is no Nagasena, you say, then who is it that wears the robes and eats the food you provide? Who keeps the precepts? Who meditates? Who reaches the goal the whole teaching is built around? If a man does a fine thing or a terrible one, and there is no self that lasts, then who is it that gets rewarded or punished? Is the monk in your hall seriously claiming that he does not exist? It is the obvious objection, the one anyone reaches for first, and the monk has been waiting for it. He does not answer with doctrine. He asks how you came to the hall this evening. By chariot, you tell him. Very well, he says. Then what is a chariot? Is the pole the chariot? You nearly laugh. Of course not. A pole is a pole. The axle, then? No. The wheels, the frame, the yoke, the reins, the goad. One by one he names the parts, and one by one you have to say no. That part is not the chariot. It is only that part. Good, he says. Then is the chariot something other than all of these? Some separate thing standing apart from the pole and the wheels and the frame? And you look honestly for that thing, and you cannot find it either. There is no extra object called the chariot hovering somewhere above its own parts. So, he says, gently, with the trap now fully shut, is there no chariot at all? Did your Majesty arrive here on nothing, walking, and you have to find your way to the only answer left? There is a chariot. You rode in it. But chariot turns out to be a word, a true and useful word, for a set of parts assembled and working together in the right way. Not a thing in addition to the parts, not a thing hidden behind them, a name for the parts in their arrangement doing what chariots do. Just so, says Nagasena with Nagasena. Just so he does not even need to add with you. If that movement feels familiar, it should. You made it yourself earlier tonight, lying right here. When you turned your attention inward to catch the one having your experiences and came back holding only more experiences, a worry, a sound, the next thought, never the thinker, you were taking your own self apart in precisely the way the monk took apart the chariot. The body, the feelings, the flickering perceptions, the habits and wants that lean you one way or another, the bare awareness running beneath all of it. The Buddhist tradition counts these as the 5 aggregates, the 5 heaps of process that a person is made of: body, feeling, perception, the bundle of habits, and awareness, and it reports, after the most patient search imaginable, that there is nothing else. No 6th thing, no owner of the 5, no little chariot of a self riding along behind your eyes. What Hume found in his farmhouse and could not stop finding, a monk had mapped on the far side of the world some 2,000 years before him, and mapped, it must be said, in far greater detail. This is not a loose resemblance dressed up for effect. A leading philosopher of the last century, Derek Parfit, spent years reasoning his own way to the bundle with no one holding it, and when he finally read the old Buddhist texts, he wrote that the views were, in his word, strikingly similar. 2 travelers with no possible way of having copied one another, sending home the same map of the same uncharted country. But here the Buddhist account does something Hume's never quite managed, and it is the whole difference between a vertigo and a door. It refuses, very precisely, to tip over into so nothing exists and none of it matters. There is a moment in the old texts where a wanderer comes to the Buddha and asks him outright, "Is there a self?" The Buddha says nothing, so the wanderer asks the opposite, Is there then no self? Again, the Buddha says nothing and lets him leave unanswered. Afterward, asked why, he explains that to say there is a self would have been to side with those who cling to a fixed eternal soul, one error, and to say there is no self would have been to side with those who hold that a person is simply nothing and dissolves into nothing, the opposite error and just as false. The truth he kept pointing at runs between the two, and it carries a name worth saying slowly: anatta, anatta, not self. It does not mean you do not exist. It means there is no fixed, separate, unchanging thing that is the real you, standing behind the process and owning it. There is the process. There is, unmistakably, the chariot rolling, the aggregates turning, the life being lived. What there is not is a passenger. And none of this stops you from being, in every way that ordinary life cares about, a single person, one who keeps a name, pays a debt, answers for a history. That much is true, and the tradition never once denied it. It is only the deepest look, the one that goes hunting for a fixed and separate owner of the life, that comes back with empty hands. Stay here a moment longer than usual because something quietly extraordinary is standing in plain view. Consider how this knowledge arrived, not handed down from a single source, not carried along one unbroken line, but found again and again independently by people who could not possibly have been in contact. A monk in the dust of the Punjab, a young skeptic in rural France, a careful Oxford philosopher, and a tired person lying in the dark tonight who simply turned their attention around and looked. None of them copied the others. None of them could have, and they came back with the same report. When witnesses who have never met, working in different centuries and different tongues, keep describing the same thing, the thing they describe stops looking like anyone's private mistake and starts looking like the way matters actually are. The empty room, it turns out, is not your own peculiar vertigo. It is one of the oldest and most reliably rediscovered findings the species has ever made. You fell through that floor tonight, and it felt like falling. But the floor has been giving way under careful minds for as long as there have been careful minds, and a great many of them, once they stopped clutching at the edge, looked around at the open space and found it was not a pit at all. The self you could not catch was never lost. There was never a thing there to lose. And a vast amount of human suffering, the tradition noticed, comes precisely from the labor of defending a self that was never there, the propping of it up, the fear for its safety, the grasping after anything that might make it more solid and more permanent. Let the search end honestly, with empty hands, and some of that fear can quietly set itself down. The very thing you were so frightened of losing, you turn out never to have had. Far from the end of you, this is the place a whole tradition called the beginning of being free. And it is not, in the end, such an alien thought once you begin to notice it everywhere. A forest is entirely real. You can walk into it, lose your way in it, love it your whole life, and yet there is no forest anywhere in addition to the particular trees, the soil, the slant of light, the birds going over. The word is true. It names all of that, alive together, and it points to no separate forest hiding behind the trees. A crowd is real enough to cheer you or to frighten you, and there is no crowd apart from the people in it. A song can stop you where you stand, and it is nothing but notes in an order, air set moving, with no song crouching underneath the sounds. None of these is a lie. None of them is nothing. They are real in exactly the way you are real, not as a single thing tucked in behind the parts, but as the parts themselves, gathered into one living arrangement and carried along. You are not one bit less real for being a process instead of a passenger. You are real the way a river is real, the way a melody is real, entirely, movingly, and without a single still point anywhere inside that stays the same. So both halves of it stand, and the Buddhist answer does not ask you to choose between them. There is no self to find. The monk is right. Hume is right. The room is empty, and the chariot is only a word. And there is, undeniably, you, lying here in the dark, the one all of this has been happening to, the one being spoken to at this very moment, the one who looked and felt the floor give and is somehow still here to feel it, no self, and yet you. The chariot is not a thing, and the chariot carried you the whole way here. The old teaching does not resolve that into something tidy, it does something better and harder. It teaches you to ride it without needing it to resolve. You can feel as much if you let your attention drop out of the argument and down into the body for a moment. The breath is moving on its own, going out, waiting, coming in, and no one is running it. The warmth holds, the heart keeps its time. 1,000 quiet processes are doing their work in the dark, gathered into one living thing, and nowhere among them is there a manager, a self at a control panel, issuing the orders. There never was one. It has held together anyway, all your life, exactly as it is holding together now. Let the breath go where it goes. It does not need you to carry it any more than the chariot ever needed a chariot tucked in somewhere among the wheels to make it roll. Last night, something strange happened to you, and it happens every night, and almost no one stops to find it strange. For a stretch of the deepest sleep, the part with no dreams in it, the part the chariot would have called complete, everything you are was taken away, not gradually but all at once, the whole of it. The body was gone. You did not feel the bed or the weight of the blanket. The world was gone. No room, no dark, no sound. Thought was gone, and time along with it, and so was the very sense of being a particular someone to whom things happen. The stripping away that took a whole chapter to argue through was simply done to you, in full, the way it is done to you every night. The self disassembled down to nothing, the room as empty as a room can be. And then this morning you woke, and you said, or could have said, the most ordinary sentence in the world. I slept well. I don't remember a thing. Sit with how odd that is. You are reporting, with quiet confidence, on a stretch of time in which, by every account so far, there was no one there at all. You have brought back word from the emptiness, and word has to be brought back by someone. So who kept watch through the part of the night when there was nothing left to watch and nothing left to be the watcher? What stayed awake when there was nothing at all to be awake to? This is the doorway into the boldest answer in the whole inquiry, and it comes from the same ground as the chariot, the same India, the same long centuries of people sitting still and turning inward, which is exactly what makes its conclusions so hard to believe. Because the monk and the king stripped the self down to its parts and found nothing left but the parts. And another tradition, the Vedanta, made the very same move with the very same patience and found something the Buddhists had insisted was not there. Its great organizer, a philosopher named Shankara Shunku-ru, who lived around the 8th century, agreed with the first half completely. You are not the body, he said. You are not the feelings, not the racing thoughts, not the memories, not the personality, not even the small daily sense of being this particular person. Set every one of them down. But where the Buddhist reached the end of that subtraction and held up an empty hand, Shankara found one thing that could not, even in principle, be set down, for the plainest of reasons, the one doing the setting down. Try the move yourself, here, in the quiet. Is the body you? You can feel it, its weight, its small aches, the breath going in and out, and whatever you can stand back and observe like that is something you have, an object held up in front of awareness, not the awareness itself. So, not this. Are the thoughts you? Watch one arrive and dissolve. You were aware of it, which means it too was an object passing before you, not the one it passed before, not this. The feelings, the memories, the whole story of being someone with a past, every one of them can be noticed, looked at, witnessed, and that makes every one of them, by the same test, a thing you observe rather than the observer. Not this, not this. Neti neti, nht, as the old texts say it, repeated until nothing observable is left. And what remains when you have honestly said it to everything? Only the witnessing itself. The awareness that all of it appeared to, and that can never once be turned into a thing that appears, because it is forever the seer and never the seen. That, said Shankara, is the Atman, Achtamun. The self the Buddhists walked straight past, and walked past precisely because they were hunting for a thing, an object, an item to be found, when it is the one reality that is never an object at all. If a version of this seems to have surfaced once before, the looker that can't be looked at, the eye that can't see itself, it did, as a careful logical point about why the search keeps coming up empty. The Vedanta takes that same point and presses it somewhere far more daring. The seer you can never catch is not a mere blank requirement, it says. It is the most real and most intimate thing there is, the one fixed star in a sky where everything else is in motion, and it is, in the end, what you have been calling yourself all along. And now, the boldness earns its keep, with the very paradox the knight handed you at the start. The Buddhist and the skeptic and your own earlier accounting all took dreamless sleep to be a clean gap. Consciousness simply switched off, and for those hours, nobody and nothing. Shankara presses on exactly that point. If you truly blinked out of existence each night, he asks, why is the report you wake with never "I did not exist for a while"? Why is it always instead "I slept, and slept well, and knew nothing"? A report not of your own absence, but of a peaceful absence of everything else, witnessed and carried back. To know that there was nothing, something had to be present for the nothing to register on. The absence of all objects, he says, is simply not the same thing as the absence of awareness, and he offers the image that makes it land. It is like sitting in a room of perfect darkness with your eyes wide open. You are seeing, fully, actively seeing, and what you are seeing is that there is nothing to see. The seeing does not stop because its objects are gone. Awareness in dreamless sleep, he says, is exactly that. Wide awake, resting on nothing. If he is right, then every night of your life you have made a quiet pilgrimage to the one place where you meet yourself with everything else subtracted, the body forgotten, the mind stopped, the personality, the memories, the whole anxious project of being someone, all of it gone, dissolved, switched off, and something remained, lit, keeping watch on the dark, not the body, which was absent, and not the thoughts, which had ceased, but only the bare awareness that was there before they arrived in the morning and will be there again tonight after they go. The one thing in you on this telling that the long day never quite manages to touch, and that the deepest sleep never quite manages to put out. Be careful, though, about what this is actually claiming, because it is easy to hear it as something softer and sillier than it is. This is not the dorm room thought that the world is an illusion, that none of it is real, that you could wish the walls away. Shankara argued hard against that idea. He took the chair and the lamp and the aching shoulder to be perfectly real, out there, exactly as solid as they seem. The claim is narrower and far stranger than "nothing is real." It is that underneath the changing, worried, particular person you take yourself to be, the one with the name and the history and the quiet fear of the dark, there is an awareness that does not change, that was not born when that person was born, and that is closer to what you actually are than any of the contents it has been silently lighting up your whole life. So now you are genuinely caught, held between two of the most patient traditions the human mind has produced, both staring at one identical fact and reading it in flatly opposite ways. Look at the stream of a life, says the one, and you will find there is no one behind it, only the experiences happening, with no experiencer tucked in among them. Look at the very same stream, says the other, and you have already overlooked the obvious. The seeing itself, the awareness all of it is happening to, is the self you went hunting for, and you missed it only because you kept expecting a thing. Even the night's evidence bends both ways. Where the Vedantin says awareness shone on, witnessing the dark, the skeptic answers that there was simply a gap, and that the brain, on waking, stitches a smooth "I slept well" across the seam, a story told afterward about a time when, in plain fact, nobody was home. The data does not settle it. Both readings fit every fact you will ever have, including the one you are about to gather, first-hand and unrepeatably, a few minutes from now. And somewhere in all of this, the question you came in with has quietly turned into a different one. You began by asking what you are: the body, the memories, the mind, the soul, the animal. But notice who has been doing the asking. Through every turn of it, searching for the soul, tracing the memory thread, standing in the empty room, watching the chariot fall to pieces, wondering now what keeps watch in the dark. Something has been present, looking, never once itself examined, always the one doing the examining. The question is no longer quite what you are made of. It has turned, without anyone deciding to turn it, into something quieter and harder to shake. What is this awareness that has been here at every step, that you can never get behind to inspect, and that may not even go out when you do? You are very close to it now, closer than at any other hour. In a little while the thoughts will thin and lose their grip, the room will loosen and go, the body will be set down and forgotten, and you will cross, as you do every night, into the dreamless dark the whole chapter has been circling. You will not be able to send word from inside it, no one ever has, but you will wake the way you always wake, with the quiet, unaccountable knowledge that you slept. And whatever that knowledge turns out to be, a report from a faithful witness or a story smoothed over an empty gap, it is the only evidence either side has ever had. And you renew it all by yourself every single morning. Whichever it is, the awareness it concerns, if it is there at all, would be the one thing about you that never changes. The still point, the long day, and the long life pour past without wearing down, which makes it worth turning before sleep takes the question to the exact opposite end of you. Because while the sages were arguing for something in you that never changes in the least, a very different kind of investigator, armed not with introspection but with instruments, was quietly measuring just how much of you does and coming back with a number strange enough to unsettle every one of them. You have almost certainly heard the number, or one of its cousins. Every cell in your body is replaced every 7 years, people say, so that the person you were a decade ago is, in the most literal physical sense, gone. Not one scrap of that old body still aboard. A bolder version puts it in atoms. 98% of the atoms in you are swapped for new ones every single year, the whole of you turned over and over like water in a glass held under a running tap. It is the kind of fact that gets passed around at dinner because it is pleasantly dizzying and because it seems to settle the oldest puzzle in the simplest possible way. You are the ship whose every plank has been changed, and here at last is the laboratory report to prove it. The trouble is that the number is wrong, and the way we found out it was wrong is a small marvel in its own right. It begins, of all places, with the Cold War. Through the 1950s and into the 60s, nations tested nuclear weapons above ground, and every blast threw a pulse of radioactive carbon high into the atmosphere until the level of it worldwide had very nearly doubled. Then, in 1963, the major powers signed a treaty. The above-ground testing largely stopped, and from that year, the excess carbon began, slowly and measurably, to fade. Here is the quiet miracle. Whenever a cell in your body is born, whenever it last divides, it builds its DNA out of the carbon available in that exact year and locks the level in, because the DNA in a settled cell is not rebuilt afterward, which means every cell in you is carrying a tiny date stamp, the signature of the year it was made, written in fallout. Decades later, researchers learned to read those stamps, to take a single cell, measure the radioactive carbon in its DNA, and say, with real precision, this one is 3 days old, this one is 11 years old, this one has been here since before you were born, an accidental clock handed to biology by the worst weapons ever built. And when they finally read the body with it, the tidy slogan fell apart. What it showed was not a single number at all, but a body of wildly mismatched ages, a patchwork. The lining of your gut, scoured by everything that passes through it, renews itself in a matter of days. Your skin turns over in weeks, the red cells in your blood across a few months, your fat over roughly a decade, your skeleton slowly across about the same. So part of the slogan is true. A great deal of you really is in flux, some of it astonishingly fast. But the parts you would most point to and call yourself are exactly the parts that do not turn over. The neurons of your cerebral cortex, the dense, folded outer layer of the brain where thought and memory and the whole of your personality are carried, are, with very few exceptions, as old as you are. They were made around the time you were born, and the same cells stay with you, undivided and unreplaced, until the day you die. The proteins at the core of the lens of your eye were laid down before your birth and are never renewed. Whatever you saw today, you saw through original glass. The enamel on your teeth is never regrown. So the dramatic claim that every part of you is periodically traded for a new part is simply false. The very tissue doing the thinking has been here the entire time. There is one careful footnote to add, because honesty is the whole point of this. The brain is not quite a frozen monument. There is a long-running scientific argument over whether one small region tied to memory keeps making a thin trickle of new neurons throughout life, and the most recent evidence has tipped that argument toward yes. But a trickle in one corner is not the wholesale replacement the slogan promised. The great mass of the thinking cortex you are using to follow this sentence is, beyond any serious dispute, the same cortex you were issued at the start. And the atoms? That striking figure, nearly all of you, replaced every year, turns out not to be a measurement at all. It traces back to a popular science talk from the early 1950s and has simply been repeated, untested, ever since. What is actually true is gentler and looser. At the level of atoms and small molecules, yes, you are in constant exchange with the world, breathing carbon in and out, drinking water that becomes you and then leaves, the stuff of you cycling through on every scale. But even there, the structure holds its place, and some of the matter, the DNA in those lifelong neurons, the old proteins in the lens, simply stays. You are leakier than a stone and far more solid than the slogan. Neither the dinner party version nor its opposite is the truth. Still, the puzzle the slogan was pointing at does not vanish just because the number was wrong, and it is worth running to the end. Suppose the swap were carried out properly, one atom at a time. A single carbon atom lifted out of you and an identical carbon atom set in its place, then another, on and on. The ship of Theseus, made flesh, performed in your own body. Now make the call the puzzle demands. At which swap exactly do you stop being you? After the first? Surely not. After a billion, or after half, or after the very last atom of all. There is no swap you can name as the one that did it, and the reason you cannot is sharp and revealing. One carbon atom is exactly like another. There is no such thing as your particular carbon, stamped somehow as yours rather than a stranger's. A carbon atom carries no history and no name. So if you were nothing more than your atoms, replacing them all with identical ones would leave you both completely unchanged, since nothing distinguishable was altered, and completely gone, since not one original remains. Both at once, which is impossible. The only way out of the contradiction is the one the whole night has kept arriving at from new directions. The matter was never the thing. You were never your atoms in the first place. Aristotle saw the shape of this answer some 23 centuries ago with none of the instruments. Every object, he said, is two things at once. Its matter, the stuff it happens to be made of, and its form, the shape and organization the stuff has been arranged into. A bronze statue is bronze, and it is also a particular figure. Melt it down, and the bronze remains while the statue is gone. And for a living thing, he saw, It is the form that does the real work, because a living thing is not a fixed quantity of matter at all, but a pattern that keeps itself going precisely by passing matter through it. Hold that against the plainest thing you could light in this room. A candle flame keeps one steady shape for hours, recognizably the same flame, and yet it is never the same gas for even a second together. Wax, rising, vaporizing, burning, gone, endlessly replaced. The flame exists only by losing and renewing its own material without pause the entire time it burns. It is not a thing at all, but a process wearing the shape of a thing, and so, it turns out, are you. What flows through you is the matter. What stays is the pattern, the particular living form that has been holding itself together, drawing in fresh material and shedding the spent since before you had a memory to mark it by. And once you see it that way, the slogan does not just turn out to be inaccurate, it turns out to have been pointing in precisely the wrong direction. The turnover was offered as proof that you are someone new, that the old you is materially dead and gone. But a living form does not persist in spite of replacing its matter. It persists by replacing its matter. The replacing is the living. The flame is not a different flame for having burned new gas. It is the same flame because it never stopped burning, never lost its shape, never let the process drop. The river is the same river precisely because the water is always new. So the very fact the slogan paraded as evidence that you are not continuous is, read correctly, the mechanism of your continuity. You were never as new as you were promised. The change was never the threat to you it was sold as. It was you, all along, in the only form a living thing was ever going to take. Look, if you like, at something in the room that proves it. A scar, maybe. One you have carried for years, decades even. Every cell that first made that scar has long since turned over and gone. The matter has cycled through it many times over since the day it formed, and yet the scar is still there, in the same place, the same shape, because what a scar is was never the cells, it was the pattern they were holding. The room is full of this once you look. The body in the bed, least of all a fixed object, more a slow, steady flame that has kept its shape through the dark of how many thousand nights. There is a quiet relief in it once the dizziness passes. You did not lose yourself every 7 years. You were continuous the entire time, in the only way anything alive ever is. And there is one part that did more than merely keep its pattern. One part that kept its very cells unbroken from the beginning, the brain, the old cortex, the original tissue. It is the single most continuous thing about you, and it happens to be the place where you keep what has felt all night, like the last solid ground beneath this whole question, the memories, the record, the archive of everything that has ever happened to you. If anything in you is bedrock, surely it is there. So reach for one now, some bright and unmistakable memory, and hold it up to the light. It will feel like the one thing in all of this that cannot possibly have changed. You reached for it, and it came, and it felt exactly as solid as promised. Fixed, finished, yours. A small piece of the past held safe in the one tissue that never turned over. That solidity is the trap. Take a different memory for a moment to see why. One of those stories you have told so many times that it has worn perfectly smooth. How you and someone first met, the worst day of a certain year, the family tale that comes out at every gathering. Tell yourself the truth about it. You can no longer separate the parts that happened from the parts the telling has added across the years. The story is vivid and confident and word perfect, and you have not the faintest idea anymore which of it is real. And here is the part that should give you pause. It is the most told stories, the ones worn smoothest and loved best, that you should trust the least. We carry a picture of memory that the science quietly demolished a long time ago. The picture is of a recording that somewhere in the brain the past is filed away intact, and remembering is simply opening the file and watching it play. It is not like that, and it never was. When you remember, you do not retrieve a stored copy. You rebuild the scene then and there out of a few surviving fragments, a face, a phrase, the shape of a feeling, and you fill in everything else on the fly, smoothly and invisibly, with what must have been there, with what you have since come to believe, with whatever the story needs to make sense. Recall is reconstruction. Every memory you have is being painted fresh each time from a sketch, and a reconstruction can be steered. In one famous line of experiments, people watched a film of a car accident and were asked afterward how fast the cars were going when they smashed into one another, or for others, when they hit one another. The single changed word reliably changed the speed they reported, and changed more than that. A week later, the ones asked about smashing were far more likely to remember broken glass at the scene. There had been no broken glass. The word had quietly written it in. Pushed further, the same researchers found they could plant whole events that had never happened, could convince ordinary adults, with a little gentle suggestion, that they had been lost in a shopping mall as a child, frightened and crying until the person could describe the day in rich, sincere, entirely invented detail. And this is the most unsettling part of all. The false memories felt exactly like the true ones. There is no inner mark, no watermark of authenticity that tells you from the inside which of your memories actually happened. Set that against the answer that felt, some chapters ago, like the warmest and truest one on offer. The memory thread, you are who you can reach back and own from the inside, the continuous remembered life. It was always the most human of the answers, and it had survived a great deal. But it quietly assumed that the thread was made of something real, that the remembered life, whatever its gaps, was at least a record of what had actually occurred. And the record turns out to be, in part, a fiction, not a lie you tell on purpose, a fiction the mind writes by itself, in good faith, filling the holes, smoothing the seams, importing things that were never there. The thread that was supposed to tie you to your own past is woven here and there, out of material your past never contained. And it gets stranger, because the record does not even sit still while you are not looking at it. There is a process the laboratory calls reconsolidation, and its discovery rearranged how memory is understood. When you bring an old memory up into the light, really recall it, really feel it, it does not simply play and slip back into storage unchanged. For a short window, it becomes soft again, editable, open, the way it was when it first formed. And then it is put back, re-saved, very slightly altered by the present moment in which you recalled it, by your mood tonight, by what you have learned since, by who you have become. So remembering is not a neutral act of reading, it is an act of writing. Every time you visit a memory, you leave your fingerprints on it and refile it lightly changed. Which gives the cruelest irony in all of this. The memories you treasure most, the ones you return to again and again, a face you have lost, a day that meant everything, are, for that very reason, the ones you have most heavily rewritten. The ones you have guarded by revisiting are the ones that have drifted furthest from what was actually there. You have been editing your treasures by loving them. Be honest, though, about how far this is established and how far it is not. The clean version of reconsolidation, the one where a memory, caught in that open window, can be deliberately weakened or even erased, is solid in the animal studies. Give a rat a fear, let it recall the fear, block the right molecule in that exact moment, and the fear can be reliably wiped. In human beings, it is far less settled. There have been striking results and shaky repeats, hopes raised for treating trauma this way and not yet clearly delivered. There is, as of now, no reliable delete button for a human memory, whatever the films keep promising. But notice that the uncertainty is all at the dramatic end, the deliberate erasure end. The quieter finding underneath it is not in doubt at all and has not been for the better part of a century. Human memory is rebuilt rather than replayed, and shifts a little every time it is handled. That much is as solid as anything in the science of the mind. It is only the question of how far the drift can be pushed and whether anyone can steer it on purpose that is still open. You can catch it happening if you go gently. Pick one clear memory, a childhood room, a first day somewhere, a goodbye. Now watch yourself actually remember it and notice what is really there against what arrives to fill the frame. You almost certainly have a few fixed points, a single face, a sentence someone said, the temperature of a mood, and around them, vivid and seamless, a whole scene that you are supplying this instant. The color of the walls, who else was in the room, the light through a window you may be inventing on the spot. You are not opening a photograph so much as painting one, right now, from a thumbnail sketch, with a confidence that has nothing to do with accuracy. And somewhere in that painting, there are almost certainly details you would swear to that are simply wrong, and from the inside, there is no possible way for you to tell which ones. This is not a rare malfunction. It is how memory works, in everyone, all the time. Almost certainly you have already met it in your own life. The cherished childhood memory you discovered years later had actually happened to a sibling, and not to you. The formative scene that a photograph or a date proves unfolded in a different season, a different house than the one you have always seen so clearly. The thing you distinctly remember someone saying, which they swear and can prove, they never said. The certainty was total, the memory was wrong, and the certainty told you nothing, because certainty is just one more feeling the reconstruction supplies. So here, at the very end of the search, the last solid ground gives way along with the rest. The soul could not be found, the body's matter flowed away, the self refused to be caught, and now the record itself, the one anchor that felt unarguably yours, turns out to be a living document, rewritten in your own hand every time you open it, part composed of events that never occurred. The witness you trusted above all the others has been quietly revising its testimony the whole time. You could let that frighten you. If even your memories are unreliable, you might think, then what is left of you at all? But it may be one more of the questions that asks to be carried rather than answered, because something stubborn refuses to follow the logic down into despair. The drifting does not, in fact, make your life feel one bit less yours. You go on remembering. The old warmth is still warm, even where the details have wandered off. The people you love are still the people you love, carried in memories that are part invention and lose not an ounce of their hold for it. Which hints at something the whole search may have had backwards from the start, that the self was never the accuracy of the archive in the first place. Maybe it was always the telling, the living, endless, faithful in its own way act of returning to a past and remaking it, rather than any fixed and faithful record of what occurred. A memory does not have to be true to be yours, it only has to be carried. And you have been carrying these, the true and the false, all mixed together, your whole life, and they have held you the entire way, which is perhaps all that was ever asked of them. And you will carry them quite literally into the next few hours, because sleep is where the editing is busiest of all. While you are under, the brain does its nightly work of consolidation, sorting through the day, deciding what to keep and what to let dissolve, folding the new hours into the long record of all the others. And folding is never neutral. In the filing, things are moved, joined, quietly revised. Tonight we'll rework today, sharpen a little of it, blur a little, stitch it into everything that came before, and you will wake tomorrow with a past faintly different from the one you are lying here with now. You hand the day over to the dark, and the dark hands it back lightly edited. The mind goes on writing you while you sleep. By now, the honest tally ought to bring a kind of peace. One by one, every solid thing the self might have been has dissolved in the hand. The soul undetectable, the body in flux, the self uncatchable, the memory rebuilt from sand. There is, it seems, nothing fixed in there to lose, and so, by every rule of logic, nothing left to be afraid of losing. But notice, lying still, what some older and deeper part of you is doing all the while, underneath the careful reasoning. It has not accepted a single word, it still flinches. It still fears, with a flat animal certainty that no argument has so much as grazed, for a self that the whole long night has been gently proving was never solid enough to fear for, which leaves one strange question standing upright where all the others fell. If there is truly nothing in there to protect, why will the fear not let go? So take the fear seriously for once, instead of trying to argue it down. A philosopher named Bernard Williams built a single, merciless thought experiment to do exactly that, to find out whether the gut's refusal is foolishness or whether it knows something all the arguments have missed. It begins simply, and you should let it happen to you rather than watch it from a safe distance. Someone you have no reason to doubt informs you, plainly and with full authority, that tomorrow you are going to be tortured. Not a threat, not a maybe, a scheduled fact. Feel what that does. The fear is instant and total and entirely physical. It arrives in the stomach and the back of the neck long before a single thought has formed. That fear is the thing we are going to test. Now Williams begins to take it apart, offering it one exit after another, each of which should, by the logic of the last few chapters, let it slip free. First, he tells you this: before tomorrow, your memory of being told about the torture will be erased. You will not see it coming. Does that ease the dread? It does not. If anything, it deepens, because now you will be tortured, bewildered, with no idea why this is being done to you. Very well, he says. Then let us wipe not just that one memory, but all of them. Every memory you have, the whole record of your life scrubbed clean before tomorrow. Still afraid? You are. The body will still be on the table, and it will still feel everything. Then take the last step, he says, the one that should finally release you. You will not merely be emptied, but refilled, given a complete new set of memories, a new personality, the actual remembered life of some other, real person, so that you wake tomorrow utterly convinced you are someone else. Convinced, say, that you are a monarch 2 centuries dead, mad and certain of it, and the terror does not lift. Being told that does nothing to reduce the horror of the torture. It only, in William's own words, compounds it. Pile on every psychological change there is, strip the memory, swap the personality, install a stranger's whole past, and the dread stays exactly where it began, fixed on this body, the one that will be lying on that table tomorrow, in pain, whoever it then believes itself to be. And now, Williams turns the same situation around, and the trap snaps shut. Set the torture chamber aside for a moment and take it from the outside, told briskly as a problem in logistics. There are 2 people. Call them you and a stranger. A procedure is going to swap your minds. Everything in you, every memory, your whole personality, the entire inner person, will be lifted out and put into the stranger's body, and everything in the stranger moved into yours. Afterward, one of the 2 resulting people will be tortured, and the other handed a fortune. And before any of it happens, you are allowed to choose. Which body should get the torture? Asked coolly, from the outside, almost everyone answers without much agony. Let the torture go to the old body, and the fortune to the one that will be carrying your mind. Because you will have gone wherever your memories and personality went. That old body, running a stranger's inner life, will not be you anymore. Here the intuition is not merely different from the first version, it is its exact reverse. You side calmly and completely with the mind, and you are willing to consign your own old body to the table because it is no longer where you live. Hold the 2 stories side by side because their disagreement is the whole point. They describe the very same physical events, a mind wiped and replaced, and this particular body tortured. Told slowly, from the inside with the dread allowed to build, the verdict is beyond argument. It is the body that will suffer, and no amount of rewriting the mind can shift the fear off it. You are the body. Told quickly, from the outside, as a swap and a choice, the verdict is equally obvious and flatly opposite. You go with the mind, and the abandoned body is not your concern. Same facts, reversed conclusion. And the only thing that changed between them was the telling, the angle, the order, whether you stood inside the fear or outside the puzzle. Your deepest intuition about what you are, it turns out, can be flipped like one of those drawings that is a young woman one moment and an old one the next, depending on nothing but how you happen to look. Williams himself thought the inside view was the more honest of the two. The cool, third person, I would go with my mind, is easy to say from a distance, he suspected, precisely because it costs nothing to say. It does not survive real contact with terror. When you actually imagine the night before, lying awake, what is afraid is not an abstract chain of psychological continuities, but this, the specific, warm, particular animal, the one that will flinch when the door opens. The body or the mind question that surfaced once before in the cold logic of a transplanted brain comes back here wearing its other face, the one that sweats. And on this telling, the body has the stronger claim because the body is what fear has always, unarguably, been about. But press on that dread before trusting it, because there is a sharp reply, and it comes straight out of everything the night has already shown. Of course, imagining your own torture feels overwhelming and unanswerable. That overwhelming, unanswerable concern for your own future is precisely the deep pull the skeptic could find no basis for, that the no-self tradition named as the very root of suffering, that the empty room and the rewritten memory were quietly dismantling. The fear's sheer force proves that it is strong. It does not prove that it is right. A feeling can be both irresistible and mistaken, and the night has been full of exactly those. The total certainty of a memory that never happened, the unshakable conviction of a self that could not be found. So which is the dread? Is it a genuine signal breaking through, the body telling you the plain truth the arguments talked themselves out of, that you are this creature and always were? Or is it the loudest version yet of the illusion they exposed, the self making its last stand on the one ground argument cannot reach, refusing through sheer animal fear to be reasoned out of existence? The thought experiment does not settle that. What it does is sharpen it to a single unbearable point, the place where what you can prove and what you cannot help feeling pull with equal strength in opposite directions. You do not need the torture to know which way your body leans. A needle moves toward the skin and something in you recoils before any decision is made. The floor drops away on a stair you misjudged, and your stomach lurches and your hands fly out, faster than thought, faster than you. That fear does not pause to ask whether the self is a bundle or a witness or a fiction. It does not care in the slightest what was concluded in any chapter. It belongs to the body, fires from the body, fears for the body, and it has been getting living things safely through the dark for far longer than there have been arguments to doubt it. Whatever the philosophers decide, the animal has already cast its vote, and it casts it the same way every single time. So the question is yours again, and tonight it is the least abstract it has ever been. Lie here and bring the table back one more time, and ask honestly what that dread is doing. Is it telling you the truth at last, that you are this body, were always this body, and the long dissolution was a beautiful mistake the body never for 1 second believed? Or is it fear doing what argument could not, keeping you sure of something the whole night kept failing to find, the self's most convincing performance saved for the very end? You are not required to answer. But notice which one your body believes, because it has already decided, and it decided long before you began to think, and it is the body, not the argument, that will be lying here in the dark when the thinking finally stops. Feel it now, the actual thing the whole question has been circling, the real weight of you settling into the mattress, the real warmth, the breath going quietly in and out without instruction. Whatever it finally turns out to be, bundle or witness or fiction or beloved animal, this is the thing that will carry you down into the dark in a little while and, on no evidence but a lifetime of mornings, expect to bring you back. The fear lives here, in the chest and the gut and the slowing breath, and so does the calm. Tonight, for once, you can let the body have the last word instead of the argument. If it is afraid, let it be afraid. If it settles, let it settle. It has kept you alive this long without ever once winning the debate, and it is not waiting on a verdict now. There is a machine that has appeared in 1,000 stories, and almost no one who steps into it ever asks the only question that matters. You step in now. It is a scanner, and it works by recording you, not a photograph, but a complete reading of every atom, every cell, the exact state of your brain, down to the last living connection. It records all of it perfectly, and in the same instant, it destroys you. The body on the pad is taken apart as the reading is made. The information flies to Mars at the speed of light, and there a second machine builds you again from fresh material. The same body, the same brain wired exactly as yours was. The same memories, the same half-finished thought you were having when you stepped in. The person on Mars opens their eyes, feels entirely themselves, remembers stepping onto the pad a moment ago, and walks off into their day. Did you just travel to Mars? Or did you die on Earth while a perfect stranger who sincerely believes it is you woke up 40 million miles away? In the stories, no one hesitates. They step on cheerfully, dissolve into light, and reassemble somewhere else with a quip. But stop the machine at the instant before the scan takes you apart, and consult the body's own honest fear, the one that would not be argued down. That body, your body, is about to be annihilated, burned off into pure information. Does it comfort that fear at all to know a copy will stand up on Mars? For most people, asked to feel it rather than theorize it, the answer is a flat and immediate no. The one on Mars can have everything. It is the one on the pad that does the dying, and no twin elsewhere makes that dying any less complete. Now, Derek Parfit, the philosopher who pressed this case harder than anyone, turns the screw. Suppose the scanner malfunctions. It makes its reading and beams it to Mars as before, where your replica wakes, perfect and whole, but this time it fails to destroy the original. You are still here, on the pad. There are now two of you, and the malfunction has done some damage. The you on Earth has taken a fatal injury and will die, with certainty, within a few days. So look at it honestly. You are standing on Earth, dying, while on Mars, a person with every one of your memories, your whole personality, your entire unfinished life ahead of them, is going cheerfully about your future. Which one is you? The Earth one, you, are in no doubt at all. You are here, you are the one dying, and that thing on Mars is a copy, a stranger wearing your stolen life. But here is the vice the case closes on you. That Mars person stands to the you of this morning in exactly the same way your ordinary self of tomorrow does, joined by the same memories, the same character, the same unbroken continuity of an inner life. If a clean teleport would have carried you to Mars, why is this Mars person merely a copy, for no better reason than that the original happened to survive? Whether the one on Mars is you cannot sensibly depend on whether some other body, back on Earth, is still breathing. And yet, it seems to. Identity has begun to do something it is not allowed to do. Strip away the machines, and the same impossibility can be built out of nothing but biology. The brain has two halves, and there is real evidence that each can carry on much of a mind on its own. So suppose your brain is divided down the middle, and each half is placed into a separate body, the way a failing organ might be shared between two patients. Both wake, and both have your memories, and both feel, completely and sincerely, that they are you, picking up your life exactly where you left it. Now stand outside the two of them and ask the question, which one is you? You cannot be both. They are two people now, in two rooms, who will live two different lives, and one thing cannot be two. You cannot be neither. It would be bizarre to insist you simply died, When two people are walking around, each carrying everything you ever were, each as continuous with you as any ordinary tomorrow. And you cannot be just one of them, because there is no possible reason to choose the left over the right. They are perfect mirror images of the same claim. Every answer is ruled out. The whole idea of identity, the plain yes or no, one and only one relation that has run beneath this entire search, simply cracks apart, defeated by a case where everything that makes you you has quietly happened twice. And here Parfit makes the move that reorganized the whole question. The reason these cases feel like impossible disasters, he says, is that we have been assuming all along that identity, the deep fact of whether some future person really is you, all or nothing, is the thing that matters, the thing we are afraid of losing. But look hard at the divided brain. Each of the two successors has everything you actually care about in surviving: your memories intact, your half-written projects, the people you love, your character, the continuous flow of your inner life carrying straight on. They have all of it. The single thing they lack is the bare label, identical to you. And they lack it only because a label meaning one and only one cannot be pinned to two people at once. So, here is the quiet bombshell. If each of them has everything you wanted out of survival and the only thing missing is the label, then the label was never the thing you wanted at all, but the continuity itself, the overlapping web of memory and intention and character running on into the future by whatever means it gets there. It is the same rope of overlapping connections you met when the memory thread was repaired, only now Parfit asks of it the question no one had asked. Is the rope what you care about, or the word one rope that we tie around it? He gave the web a name, relation R, and set it in the place identity used to stand. Identity, he said, is just the ordinary case where that web runs on in a single line and we find it convenient to stamp it the same person. The stamp was always riding on top of the thing that mattered. It was never the thing itself. Parfit's is not the only way out of the trap. David Lewis built another, very different one, and the two side by side show how strange the ground has become. Stop thinking of a person, Lewis said, as a thing wholly present at each moment, complete in the here and now. Think of a person as something stretched out through time, like a long road seen from above. You are the whole shape of your life, from the first cry to the last breath, with a slice of you at each moment along the way. On that picture, the divided brain has a clean and startling answer. There were two of you all along. Two of these life shapes, perfectly overlapping, sharing every slice, running as one indistinguishable road right up to the operation, and then forking at last into the two roads they had secretly always been. You did not become two, and you did not die. Two people who had been traveling as one, closer than any twins, simply came apart. Where Parfit rescues the situation by keeping one person and demoting identity, Lewis rescues it by keeping identity and quietly multiplying the people. Both make the impossibility vanish. Neither leaves your ordinary sense of being a single, solid self standing. It would be easy to read all of this as one more loss, the final demolition of the solid self, and to feel the floor give way again. Parfit felt the opposite, and what he wrote about it is the most quietly astonishing thing in any of this. When he had believed in the deep, all-or-nothing self, the further fact that either survives or is annihilated, his life, he said, had felt like a glass tunnel through which he was moving faster every year, with darkness waiting at the end of it. And then his view changed. When I changed my view, he wrote, the walls of my glass tunnel disappeared. I now live in the open air. There is still a difference between my life and the lives of other people, but the difference is less. Other people are closer. I am less concerned about the rest of my own life and more concerned about the lives of others. His own death, he found, came to seem less bad, not because he had talked himself out of caring, but because there was no longer a deep single self there to be utterly extinguished, only the slow thinning of the connections between the experiences happening now and the ones still to come. The dread did not vanish, but it loosened its grip, the way a hand loosens when it finally understands it has been clenched around nothing. And he noticed, without much surprise by then, that this was the same open country a tradition on the far side of the world had mapped 2,000 years before him. By sitting still and looking, the same emptiness felt the same way as a release, none of which means Parfit simply won. His conclusion is among the most influential and the most fiercely resisted arguments in modern philosophy, and the honest report is that it remains open. The cases are real. The teleporter and the divided brain genuinely break the simple all-or-nothing picture, and almost no one disputes that much. What stays contested is what to make of the break. Some point out that Parfit's account quietly makes your survival hang on whether a rival copy happens to exist, that you live if your replica fails to form and perish if it succeeds, which seems a very strange thing for survival to depend on. Others stand with the body's own verdict and insist that the gut's terror at the scanner is hard data, not a bias to be reasoned away, and that any theory calmly concluding your annihilation does not matter has lost contact with the very thing it was meant to explain, and it is genuinely unsettled whether what matters can be peeled away from identity as cleanly as Parfit needs. No one has closed this. What the cases prove is only that the old picture cannot stand. The right replacement is still, decades on, being argued in the open-air Parfit claimed to be living in. You have, in fact, been watching this exact puzzle your whole life and waving it straight through. The transporter on the screen, the captain who steps onto the pad, dissolves into a column of light and reassembles, whole and unbothered, on the planet below, is precisely the destructive scanner performed weekly for entertainment. No one in any of those stories ever asks whether the captain who walks off down there is the one who stepped on up here, or whether the device is in plain fact a very courteous execution, dismantling a person each time and assembling a fresh copy who inherits the uniform and the memories and never knows the difference. The most used machine in all of science fiction is, on one entirely serious reading, a daily death that everyone aboard treats as a morning commute. And it has never once spoiled anybody's evening, which may be the most revealing fact of all. So you are left holding both at once, and tonight there may be no honest way to set either down. The dread is real. The body on the pad, the one on earth that does the dying, will not be talked out of its terror and should not have to be. And the relief is real too, if there was never a deep, single, further self in there to begin with, then the thing you have spent a lifetime braced to lose was, in some strange and serious sense, never quite the point. Both are true in the same chest at the same time. The animal that will never willingly step onto the pad, and the mind that has seen there may be nothing on the pad to lose. You do not have to reconcile them. It may be enough for tonight to let them lie side by side, the fear and the lightness, the clenched hand and the open air, the way you might hold a hard truth that turns out, once you stop fighting it, to also be a mercy. And you will rehearse a gentle version of the whole thing in a little while, the way you do every night. As sleep comes, the very web Parfit pointed to, the memory, the intention, the running thread of connection between this moment and the next, will begin to thin. The day's plans set themselves quietly down. The thread between who you are now and who will be here in an hour stretches and slackens and very nearly lets go. You cross the dark, and in the morning the web draws itself back together and runs on, and you call the one who wakes by your name without a second's hesitation. It is the same continuity the teleporter copies, the same relation R that binds tonight to tomorrow, stretched each night almost to breaking and holding, somehow, every time. You have been stepping onto the pad your whole life and waking on the far side of the dark. But notice one thing about that web before it carries you under. It is not a single thread. It is a weave, memory laced through intention, laced through the slow grain of a character. And a weave is not yet a life. A heap of genuine connections, however tightly overlapped, is still only a sequence until something gathers it into a shape, gives it a direction, makes of all those linked moments not just a chain but one thing with a beginning and a middle that you can live inside and call your own. What does that gathering, what takes the bare fact of continuity and turns it into a life, your life, a self with a form? There is an answer, and it has been waiting underneath all the others because it hands the whole weight of the question back to you, that you make the shape yourself, that a self is not so much found as told. So try it. Someone asks you, the way people do, across a table, on a first night, in your own head when you cannot sleep, who are you? Notice what you reach for, not your atoms, not your psychological continuities, not the carbon-dated age of your cells, but a story. You begin, almost without deciding to, somewhere near a beginning, where you came from, what happened to you, the turn that made you who you are, the thing you are still trying to become. Out of the countless million moments you have actually lived, you select a handful, set them in an order, draw a line of cause and meaning through them, and cast yourself quietly as the one they all happen to. The self you hand across the table when someone asks is not a thing you found. It is a story you told. This is not just a figure of speech. After everything that has fallen apart tonight, the soul, the memory thread, the findable self, even the trusted record, a serious tradition of thinkers arrived at exactly this conclusion. Stop hunting for a thing that is the self. There is no thing, the self is not found, it is composed. You take the gappy, unreliable, partly invented material of a life, the rope of continuities, full of holes, woven here and there from events that never happened, and you make of it a narrative, a coherent shape with a past that explains the present and a direction towards some future. That made shape is the self, and there is nothing underneath it left to be. The idea surfaced briefly already when the record turned to sand, that the self might be the telling rather than the told, and these thinkers make it the whole answer. The French philosopher Paul Ricoeur put the heart of it precisely. You are and you are not the person you were 10 years ago. Not the same because almost everything has changed. Not a different person either, because one continuous told life runs through all the change and holds it together as a single who, the who that can make a promise today and be the one who keeps it next year. The story is what lets a changing thing still be someone. Others added the necessary guardrail. This is no license to invent yourself out of thin air, since a serious life story has to answer to the facts and to the people who were there. You cannot simply decide you were a war hero or that the marriage was happy, and Daniel Dennett gave the view its sharpest image. The self, he said, is a center of narrative gravity, not a thing with weight or a location, exactly as a center of gravity is not an object you could ever pick up, but a point that all the forces are organized around, real in the way any pattern is real. The brain spins the stories, and the self is the point they are all about. And there is unsettling evidence that the brain really is built to do this. That story making is not something you occasionally do, but something it does, constantly, on its own. It comes from people whose two brain hemispheres have been surgically separated, an operation once used to control severe epilepsy. In them, you can show something to one hemisphere that the other, the one that speaks, cannot see. Flash an instruction to the silent side, stand up, walk, and the person stands and walks. Then ask them why. The speaking hemisphere has no idea, it never saw the instruction, but it does not say so. It does not say, I don't know. Instantly, smoothly, with complete sincerity, it makes something up. I wanted to stretch my legs, I was going to get a drink, and it believes its own invention completely. Researchers named this the interpreter. a part of the mind whose entire job is to spin a seamless story out of whatever the person is doing, supplying reasons it does not have for actions it never ordered, which raises a genuinely vertiginous possibility. The unified narrating self may not be something the brain discovers and reports. It may be something the brain manufactures after the fact all the time, a story so well told and told so continuously that the teller cannot tell it is being made up. But just as the narrative view begins to look like the final word, the self at last accounted for as the story the brain cannot stop telling, a sharp dissent arrives, and it comes from a philosopher reporting simply on himself. Galen Strawson read the growing consensus that to be a real person, to be whole, to live well, you must experience your life as an unfolding story, and found that he does not and never has. I have absolutely no sense of my life as a narrative, he wrote. Absolutely none. He does not feel himself as a single self stretched across time, reaching back into a remembered past and forward into a planned future. He lives, by his own account, largely in the present. The person who did things long ago feels to him almost like someone else, of real but limited concern, and he feels no urge at all to gather it all into one continuous tale. And he is emphatic that he is not broken for this, not missing something, not living a lesser life. He draws a distinction worth keeping. Some people are what he calls diachronic. They naturally experience the self as something that persists through time, the ongoing hero of their own long story. Others are episodic, fully present, here, now, with a past that is genuinely theirs, but does not feel like them stretched backward into it, and no narrative arc binding it all together. Strawson is episodic, and his charge is twofold. The narrative self is not universal. Episodic people exist and live perfectly good and ethical lives, and it is not even always healthy. The relentless drive to make a story can falsify, smoothing a messy life into a tidy arc that flatters and deceives, mistaking a good plot for the truth. Strawson's point lands on a real overreach, and it deserves to be named plainly. The narrative view is genuinely powerful, as a description of how a great many people do experience being a self, and as a constructive answer to what holds a scattered life together. The trouble begins when it slides quietly from a description into a command. You can hear the slide everywhere now. Not, this is one way a self gets made, but you must author your story, find your narrative, live your arc. The suggestion that a person without a strong life story is somehow unfinished, adrift, in need of repair. That is the move from noticing how some lives feel to prescribing how all lives must be, and it forgets the episodic person entirely, the one who is whole and well and simply does not live as the protagonist of an ongoing book. A good account of the self had become, without anyone quite deciding it should, an instruction on how to have one. So before assuming which you are, check, honestly. When you picture yourself 10 years from now, does it feel like you will be there, the same continuous self arrived in that future, or more like making arrangements for a person who will inherit your life and your debts? When you call up something you did long ago, does it feel like you, the very same one, reaching back into it, or like reading a vivid account of a character who happens to share your name? There is no right answer to be. This is not a test you pass. Most people fall somewhere along the line between the two, and most lean toward the continuous, story-shaped end. But a real number of people, checking honestly for the first time, are startled to find themselves nearer the present tense, episodic end than a culture forever telling them to live their story had ever let them suspect. And notice what that does to the question. Is the self a story? Turns out to have no single answer, because it was never one question. It was a question about temperaments wearing the disguise of a question about everyone. And there, in the honest checking, the question quietly changes into a different one, the way it keeps doing. You set out to ask whether the self is a story, looking, that is, for the self as the content of the tale, the figure it is all about, the protagonist. But through every line of it, the telling, the checking, the weighing of whether the story is even true, the deciding which kind of self you are, there has been someone doing the telling. A teller, the one selecting the moments and drawing the line of meaning. The one who could, if they chose, tell it all another way tomorrow. The self you kept trying to describe keeps turning out to be the describing, never quite the character on the page, always the one holding the pen. And it is the same one you realize that the long search could never catch, and the silent witness could never turn into an object. The one who is never in the story because it is always, only, the one telling it. The question is no longer, what is the self? It has become, who is doing all this telling, and can the teller ever, even once, get into the tale? You have in fact been doing it all night, lying right here. The dark room at this hour is where the day's story gets its last quiet edit. A few of the day's countless moments chosen, the rest let go. The whole thing shaped into a small tale with you somewhere near its center before sleep files it away with all the others. Look around the room. This is the editing booth of the self, and you visit it nightly, half asleep, the most honest storyteller you will ever be, precisely because you are too tired to flatter the plot. But a told story, however true, however well-shaped, has one requirement its tellers do not always face. It needs someone who will actually live it. Someone who will get up tomorrow and be the person the story says you are, who will keep the promises written into the earlier chapters, who will stand behind the whole account and answer for it. A self that is only narrated, that no one acts out or stands behind, is just a set of words about no one. And so a last voice steps forward in the dark with a different and more practical claim that in the end a self is not found and not even merely told, but done, built daily by the plain hard work of acting as one continuous person, keeping faith with who you were and who you mean to be in a life you do not author alone. There is a kind of mourning everyone knows. You made a promise some time ago to be there, to help someone move, to call, to show up for a thing you no longer have the slightest desire to show up for. The mood that made the promise is long gone. The reasons have gone faint. The version of you that said yes, eager and warm, feels by everything the night has shown like half a stranger, a different bundle of perceptions, a different stretch of the rope, a self since quietly rewritten, and yet you get up, and you go, and you keep it. The question is why? What ties the one who promised to the one who keeps it, across a gap the whole night has spent insisting may have no single self stretched over it at all? It is not an idle question, because if you took the dissolution literally, really lived as though there were no continuous self to speak of, almost everything decent would quietly come apart. Why keep a promise made by someone who is barely you? Why pay a debt run up by a past self you can hardly reach? Why save for, or even spare a thought for, a future self who is, on the same arguments, a near stranger? You will probably shortchange the way we all shortchange that stranger, leaving them the bill and the broken resolutions. Why show up tomorrow for the people you love, when the you of tomorrow is only loosely tied to the you of tonight? Carry the night's conclusions out into the street and they would dissolve promises, debts, loyalty, the whole long, patient work of being someone others can count on. And yet no one actually lives that way, and we would rightly be appalled by anyone who tried, who shrugged and said the self who borrowed the money simply isn't here anymore. So either the dissolution is somehow wrong, or it has been leaving something essential out. What it leaves out is the difference between two ways of looking at yourself, and a philosopher named Christine Korsgaard built her answer on exactly that difference, as a direct reply to the view that identity is not what matters. Grant all the metaphysics, she said. Grant that, seen from the outside, the scientist's view, the metaphysician's view, the view that treats you as one more object to be analysed. There is no deep further self to be found, and Parfit is right. It changes nothing where you actually live. Because there is a second standpoint you can never climb out of, the standpoint of someone who has to act. And from inside action, being oneself is not optional. To do anything at all is to choose this and not that, here and not there, and a choice requires a chooser, a single someone who weighs the options, decides and then owns the deed as theirs. You cannot deliberate as a crowd of momentary selves. The very act of making up your mind pulls you together into one mind to be made up, and it does not stop at the instant. To do anything that takes longer than a moment, to learn something, mend something, raise a child, love a person, climb out of a hole, you must bind your future selves to your present choices. Treat the one who wakes tomorrow as yours to commit. Hold the whole line of yourself to what you have begun. Identity, on this account, is not a fact you discover about yourself, but a task you carry out. You become one continuous person by the unrelenting work of acting like one. But there is a loneliness hidden in that answer, the picture of a solitary will hauling itself into unity by sheer effort, and a far older tradition supplies exactly what it leaves out, by refusing from the very start to look for the self where the whole night has been looking. For 2,500 years, the West in this search has looked inward. The soul within, the memory within, the witness within, the self somewhere behind the eyes. Confucius barely looks inward at all. In the sayings his students gathered after his death, in the book we call the Analects, a person is not a thing tucked away inside, waiting to be found. A person is a knot in a net of relationships, child and parent, friend, teacher and student, neighbor, and you become a self by living those bonds well, by the lifelong practice of meeting each one with the right care, treating others with a kind of grace that has to be learned and rehearsed, growing into your roles the way a musician grows into an instrument over years through repetition until the playing is simply part of who you are. The self here is not given and not hidden. It is achieved slowly, and it is made of its relationships rather than concealed behind them. Modern interpreters of the tradition put it with a phrase worth keeping, though it is their reconstruction and not a line from any ancient text. We are not so much human beings, finished things, as human becomings, never complete, always in the making, and made in very large part by and with the people we are bound to. Put the two together and the answer fills out. Korsgaard supplies the doing, that a self is something you enact by acting as one. Confucius supplies the company, that you never do it alone and that what you are enacting is woven out of your ties to other people, and both come true in the most ordinary act there is, keeping the promise. Watch what the keeping actually does. By getting up and keeping it, you reach back across the gap and claim the one who made it as yourself. You do not find a self already stretched between the two ends. You stitch one into being by the act, binding the promiser and the keeper into a single person with a single deed. The promise never needed a continuous self underneath it. The keeping of it is how the continuous self gets made, one kept word at a time, and it is never a solitary stitching, because the promise was made to someone, and you keep it because they are counting on it, because the bond is real. Because being the kind of person whose word holds is how you go on being someone another can love and rely on and build a life beside. The same runs forward. The future self you are tempted to shortchange becomes yours precisely by your refusing to shortchange them, by saving for them, planning for them, keeping faith with them now the way you would for someone you love. You do not first have a continuous self and then keep faith. You keep faith, and the continuous self is what the keeping makes. There is an unexpected relief in this after the long dissolution, the relief of work you can actually do. You do not have to settle, tonight or ever, what the self ultimately is, whether the room is empty or the witness is real, whether you are a bundle or a story or a four-dimensional worm. You only have to decide tomorrow and the day after that, whether to be the one who keeps the promise, who pays what is owed, who shows up for the people the morning will hand you back to. The self stops being a fact to be uncovered and becomes a thing to be done, again, daily, by you, in the doing. Which is, in the end, a question only you can answer, and you answer it not by thinking, but by getting up. So decide, here in the dark, not what you are, but who, tomorrow, and with whom, you are going to be. You can carry that, gently, down into sleep, not as a problem to be cracked before morning, but as a quiet resolve to take with you, the way you carry any intention into the dark and find, often enough, that the night has done some of the work by the time you wake. The mind goes on turning it over while you rest, and tomorrow the doing simply begins again with the people who will be there. But there is one more thing to notice lying here, before the dark takes the question for the night. The whole practical answer, that you make the self by acting, by keeping faith, by caring forward, rests on a quiet act of trust you are about to perform without a second thought. In a few minutes you will hand this body and this half-built self and every promise it has not yet kept over to the dark and entrust the whole of it to someone you have never met, the one who will open these eyes in the morning and carry it on. You have been building that person all night simply by caring about them in advance. And the time has nearly come to meet them at the only place you ever can, the far edge of sleep, where you let go of today's self completely and someone you are trusting entirely steps quietly into your place. 2,500 years ago in China, someone else lay down at the end of a day, very nearly as you are about to, and the sleep he fell into handed him this exact question in its purest form. His name was Zhuangzhou, Zhuangzi, Zhuaheng, and he dreamed he was a butterfly. Not a man dreaming of a butterfly, but a butterfly entire, drifting on the warm air, opening and closing its wings in the sun, knowing nothing whatever of any Zhuangzhou. And then he woke, and there he was again, solid and unmistakable, a man on a mat in the afternoon. But the waking left him holding something he could not put down. Had Zhuangzhou dreamed that he was a butterfly? Or was he now a butterfly, dreaming that it was Zhuangzhou? Between a man and a butterfly, he said, there must surely be some difference. And yet, lying there in the slow light, he could not for the life of him find it. He gave the not finding a name. He called it the transformation of things. You are about to do the very thing he did. In a little while you will lie back, and the self will loosen, and the dark will take you, and somewhere inside it, you may open wings you do not have, or wander a life that is not yours, and believe it utterly. And then you will wake and assume without the smallest flicker of doubt that you are the one who lay down. His small question is the whole of tonight's question in its oldest and lightest dress. Who wakes, and which one, the dreamer or the dreamed, the one who lay down or the one who rises, is the real you? It is the question you arrived with hours ago, and it is worth seeing before the dark how far it has traveled. You came in holding something simple, almost practical, whether you are the same person you were yesterday, and expecting perhaps a plain yes or a plain no. What the night handed you instead was every serious answer the species has ever found, and the slow education of watching each one give something true and then quietly come apart in your hands. The first answers all went looking for a thing. The soul came first, the oldest comfort of all, some unchanging essence beneath the change, the real you riding through it untouched. And it gave that comfort freely, right up until you noticed that a thing you could never feel, never lose, never catch coming or going, could not be the thing you were so afraid of losing. Then memory stepped up, warmer and far more human. You are your remembered life, the bright thread you can reach back along and own from the inside. It gave you back to yourself in a form you could actually love. And then the thread frayed and snapped on a single fair example. And, worse, the memories themselves turned out to be repainted every time you reached for them, part invention, the record quietly rewriting itself in your own hand each time you opened it. Then the body offered to be the answer the mind could not, the one thing always here, breathing. warm, continuous, the creature that flinches and dreads and will not be talked out of its own existence. And it very nearly held until the matter ran out through it like water, and a single cold thought experiment showed you would follow your mind out of that body without much hesitation. Or perhaps you would not, leaving even the body undecided, its fear and its claim both real and neither one final. Then came the answers that went looking and found nothing there, and made, in the end, a strange peace with the nothing. Turn your attention inward, they said, and try to catch the one your experiences are happening to, and you come back holding only more experiences, never the one underneath, the bundle with nobody behind it, the chariot that turns out to be no more than its parts in motion. A skeptic in a farmhouse found it, and a monk on the far side of the world had found it 2,000 years before him, and what looked at first like the floor giving way turned out, for a great many who fell through it, to be less a pit than an opening into sky. Against that stood the witness, the awareness that all of it appears to, that can never once be caught, because it is the catching itself, the single thing the deepest, darkest, dreamless sleep may never entirely put out. And then the self as a story, made rather than found, composed fresh each night out of the day's loose hours, until a quiet voice pointed out that some people carry no story at all and live perfectly well, and that the one telling the tale is never anywhere inside it. And the most radical answer of them all, that identity is simply not the thing that matters, that what you have spent a whole life braced to lose was never quite the point, and that seeing this can feel less like a death than like the walls of a long glass tunnel falling away and the open air pouring in. And last, when every attempt to find the self or define it had given and failed in turn, the night made one final move. It stopped looking and turned practical. Whatever the self finally is or isn't, you will still have to be one tomorrow, to keep the promise, to pay what is owed, to show up for the people you love. And that turned out to be not a retreat, but an answer in its own right. That a self is not so much a fact you uncover as a thing you do daily by acting as one in the company of others who are all quietly doing the same. 8 answers, and more besides, each one true enough to believe and broken enough to have to leave behind. It would be easy to call a night like that a failure, all those questions and not a single answer that holds all the way down. But feel what is actually in your hands now. Not nothing, not even less than you began with. You came in with a small, flat question and a hope for a verdict. You are leaving with something far larger and far more alive, the plain knowledge that the same person was never one single thing at all, that you are a process and not a stone, a continuity and not a possession, something taken apart a dozen different ways tonight and still, unmistakably, here, awake and asking. The question did not get answered, it got deeper. And a question that has gotten deeper is not one that has failed you. It is one that has finally begun to do its work, because it has genuinely changed in your hands, and seeing how is the last clear thing before the dark. Somewhere tonight you stopped asking whether you persist, the small accountant's question, the one that wanted a yes or a no, and began asking something underneath it, something you could not even have formed when you lay down. Not whether you last, but what this is, this being here at all, this bare and astonishing fact that there is someone for the question to occur to, this awareness that has sat behind every turn of the night, watching the soul fail and the thread fray and the self slip the net again and again, and is sitting behind this very sentence right now, unexamined, doing the reading. The question got clearer the way a wide country gets clearer as you climb above it. Not simpler, but vaster, more of it in view at once. You can see now how it touches very nearly everything, how it is the same question underneath as how to grieve someone and how to forgive the person you used to be, and why a promise made years ago still has the power to hold you, and what exactly it is you fear when you are afraid of dying. It began as a small puzzle about staying the same. It has opened, without your deciding it should, into the whole strangeness of being anything at all. And three voices from three corners of the world and the centuries seem to lean toward one another in the dark, not agreeing exactly, but sounding a single low chord. Zhuangzi, who could not tell the man from the butterfly, and decided that the not telling was simply what it is to be one transforming thing among all the others, and stopped struggling against it, and found the surrender was a kind of peace. The modern philosopher who discovered that the moment he loosened his grip on the solid self he had been clutching, the walls of his life fell away and the open air came flooding in, and the old tradition that sat very still in the dark and found that something stays awake there, or seems to, when every other thing is gone. They do not settle the metaphysics among themselves. One says there is no self. One says the self is the only thing finally real, and one merely smiles and watches the shapes keep changing. But beneath all of their disagreement, they are saying the same quiet thing about how the question is to be held, not with a clenched hand, and not forced shut. The dissolving was never the enemy. It may even have been the doorway all along. Let it be said plainly, here at the very end, the thing this whole channel is quietly built on, because tonight is the night to say it. You are not going to solve this, not tonight, not in a year, not ever, and that is not the defeat it sounds like. Some questions are not problems with answers waiting at the far end of them. They are companions. They are not meant to be solved and filed away and forgotten. They are meant to be carried, returned to, lived alongside, and they pay you not in solutions but in the quality of the attention they ask of you. And attention, spread out across a whole life, is very nearly what a life is made of. To carry a question like this one well, to keep it open when it would be so much easier to seize the nearest answer and stop asking, is not weakness and it is not evasion. It is a kind of intelligence, and perhaps the rarest kind there is. The steadiness to let a true thing stay open, to let I don't know be an honest place to rest rather than a defeat to run from. Certainty is the cheap move, always available, always a little false. The fine and difficult thing is to hold the question gently, all the way to the edge of sleep, and let it go on working quietly in you while you rest. And of every question there is, this is the one most worth taking down into the dark. Because the dark is where it has always been loudest, and because you do not, as it turns out, have to answer it in order to set it down. So, set it down. Not solved. Set down, the way you set down a weight you have carried far enough for one day. In a few minutes you will do the most ordinary and least believable thing a person ever does. You will fall asleep. You will let go of this self completely, the one who has been thinking all of this, worrying at all of this, and trust, on no good evidence at all, that someone will be here in the morning to take it up again. That someone is the nearest stranger you will ever meet. Not quite you, by everything tonight has shown, and yet the one you have been caring for all this while by sitting up and asking these questions on their behalf. You are about to hand them everything you have, the body, the half-kept promises, this open, unanswered question. You do not have to know whether they are really you. You only have to let go. The butterfly and the man will trade places in the dark, and neither one will mind. The witness, if it is there, will keep its watch. If it is not, the dark will keep watch instead. The question will rest on the pillow beside you, open and kept, and in no hurry at all. You are never going to be the same person tomorrow. You never have been, not once, on any morning of your whole life, and you woke anyway, every single time and went on, and it was enough. So rest now. You do not need an answer in order to sleep. You do not need to be the same to be carried. The question is yours, and it will keep, and so in whatever way the night allows, will you. Let the shoulders come down. Let the breath find its own slow way to the bottom. Whoever wakes will have the morning, and the question, and the whole strange gift of being someone at all to begin again with. That has always been enough. It is enough tonight. Sleep well. Good night.